On a cold February afternoon in Wenatchee, Washington, 17-year-old Mackenzie Cowell stepped outside from her beauty school for a break, but she didn't inform anyone of her absence plan. She vanished without a trace. Hours later, her locked car was discovered in a secluded canyon away from town. There was only one set of footprints leading away into the snow. No one knew her whereabouts or what had occurred. What began as a missing person investigation quickly escalated into a more troubling situation. In the quiet town of Wenatchee, Washington, 17-year-old Mackenzie Cowell was recognized as a lively and dedicated young woman with a promising future. She managed her time between the homes of her divorced parents while preparing for high school graduation. In addition to her academic responsibilities, Mackenzie was also pursuing her dream of becoming a hairstylist by attending the Academy of Hair Design. Her life was busy, filled with early mornings, long days, and evenings spent dancing with her school's performance group, the Applettes, or participating in local modeling events. Mackenzie had faced challenges, including years of bullying because of her prominent underbite, which she hoped to correct with surgery. Nevertheless, she approached life with resilience. Her growing self-confidence was admired by both friends and family. Her father, Reed Cowell, often praised her relentless drive and determination. Her each day began before sunrise and extended well into the night. At that time, Mackenzie was in a close relationship with Joaquin Villazano, and they were nearly inseparable. Everything seemed to be going well until the events of February 9, 2010, changed everything. That evening, Mackenzie planned to have dinner with her father. It was meant to be a rare break in her busy schedule. When she didn't call after school, as she usually did, Reed quickly became worried. By 8 p.m., just as the family was about to report her missing, the police called first. They had found Mackenzie's car, a 2000 Pontiac Grand Prix, abandoned near Mission Ridge, about 40 miles from her home in Orondo. The surroundings were dark, isolated, and covered in snow. The car was locked. Cowell's wallet and some of her clothes were found in the car, although her debit card and mobile phone were missing. Only a pair of footprints were found at the scene, according to police, indicating that she had been alone when it was left there. The search for Mackenzie started right away. Bloodhounds, helicopters, and volunteers searched the steep and rugged area near where her car was discovered, but they found no clues. Although her case was classified as a missing person case with a risk of death, it did not initiate an Amber Alert. However, the local community and soon the entire nation became aware of her disappearance. Mackenzie's face was featured on news channels, and the FBI sent agents to assist local detectives. Everyone was eager for answers, but the situation was confusing. Mackenzie had never run away before. She was well-liked, responsible, and had strong ties to her family and community. At approximately 3 p.m. on February 9, 2010, she was last seen on surveillance video leaving the Hair Design Academy, walking to her car, and driving away. She told her classmates that she would be back in less than 15 minutes. Around this time, she sent a text message to her boyfriend saying, "Hey, what's up?" This was the last time she was known to have used her phone. After that, there was no further communication from her, making that text the last digital trace of her. Her debit card remained unused in the days that followed. Witnesses soon began to report their observations. Several residents near Mission Ridge stated they saw a tall, slim man with dark hair wearing a long coat walking alone around the time when Mackenzie's car was believed to have been abandoned, between 4:30 and 5:30 p.m. The police then focused on Mackenzie's phone records, examining thousands of messages, calls, and social media activities from platforms like Facebook and MySpace. However, despite the large amount of information, they could not find a clear lead. Detectives did not consider it a runaway case. For 3 days, her family, friends, and investigators remained hopeful, distributing flyers, searching the area where her abandoned car was found, and pursuing every potential lead. However, their hope turned to heartbreak. On the afternoon of February 13th, Mackenzie's body was discovered by a passerby on the banks of the Columbia River near Quincy, Washington, in a resort community about 32 kilometers from Wenatchee. She was found fully clothed, with her feet in the water. A vacant home for sale is located about 46 meters from where her body was found. The scene was eerie and unsettling. While authorities kept many details secret, what was revealed was alarming. Mackenzie had been beaten, stabbed, and strangled. There were no banned substance or alcohol in her system. Although she had not been abused, there was an attempt to dismember her after death. Her arm was partially cut off, and a serrated knife was found in her shoulder. Nearby, duct tape was discovered on the ground. Dive teams returned to search the riverbank, expanding their efforts to neighboring counties to gather clues. Detectives acknowledged they had no clear suspects. Mackenzie could have been targeted by someone she knew or by a stranger. Her death shocked the community. As news spread through schools and neighborhoods, about 1,800 people attended Cowell's memorial service, which was held at the Toyota Town Center in Wenatchee on February 25th. The FBI increased its involvement in the case by forming a special task force. Investigators began their inquiry by interviewing people close to Mackenzie, including her boyfriend, Joaquin Villazano, and her mother's boyfriend, Joey Fisher. Although Joey appeared distressed and reportedly failed a lie detector test. It was noted that Joey had an argument with Mackenzie the day before her disappearance, but there was no evidence linking him to her death. Then, both Joaquin and Joey were later completely cleared by the police. As time passed, detectives pursued numerous leads. One notable tip came from Liz Reed, who is a college student, police informant, and former drug lord. Reed told the police that two banned substance lords, Sam Cuevas and Emmanuel Cerros, had killed Mackenzie in a case of mistaken identity. The two men reportedly believed that Mackenzie was a banned substance lord. Reed claimed that she had seen a snuff film about the murder, and Cuevas admitted to her that he choked Mackenzie to keep her quiet. Reed was able to describe the murder weapon before it was made public and provided the police with a ring that she claimed belonged to Mackenzie. She stated that Cerros had sent her to the murder scene to find the ring. None of the Cowell family members recognized the ring as belonging to Mackenzie. Reed later retracted her claim. As a result, the police began to doubt Reed's credibility. Cuevas and Cerros were questioned by the police and presented alibis, witness statements, and phone records showing that they were elsewhere on the day Mackenzie went missing. After encountering this setback, investigators continued their work. They pursued over 750 tips and conducted more than 800 interviews, collecting DNA samples from dozens of individuals. Despite their efforts, they were unable to identify the person responsible. For several months, Mackenzie's mother chose to stay silent out of respect for the ongoing investigation. However, as time passed without any leads, she felt compelled to go public, urging anyone with information, no matter how trivial it might seem, to come forward. The case took a new direction when a fresh informant stepped forward. After receiving some information, police began focusing their investigation on Christopher Scott Wilson. Christopher had previously attacked a woman at a party, choking her violently for no reason before acting as if nothing had occurred. At 29 years old, Christopher had attended the same hair design academy as Mackenzie and lived just a few blocks away from it. Those who knew him described Christopher as quiet and polite, but also strange. Simultaneously, police received a letter in August claiming that Christopher had an obsession with death, corpses, and serial killers. One of his schoolmates told police that Christopher had said he used to work at funeral homes and that he liked cutting people up, which raised concerns in light of the violent details surrounding Mackenzie's murder. One mentioned that he bragged about cutting people up while handling bodies, and another remembered him claiming he had strangled someone with a belt during a hotel encounter. Despite these alarming stories, those close to him defended him. His mother argued that being different did not make her son dangerous, while his best friend described him as kind and generous, suggesting he was simply misunderstood. Christopher stood out for more reasons than just his looks. He was at the academy on the same day Mackenzie vanished and left through the same back door just 2 minutes after her. After that, it became difficult to track his movements. He did send a few texts to his ex-girlfriend, but nobody could confirm his location that afternoon. He had no prior criminal record, and when the police questioned him, he claimed he didn't know Mackenzie at all. He even agreed to give a DNA sample, which turned out to be a major mistake. DNA from duct tape found near Mackenzie's body matched Christopher. When faced with the DNA match and questioned about his presence in the area, Christopher completely denied being there. Upon learning that his DNA was found at the crime scene, he asked for a lawyer, and the interview concluded. Investigators found it significant that Christopher was obsessed with Dexter, a fictional character known for dismembering his victims, which mirrored the injuries on Mackenzie's body. Along with the DNA evidence and the odd timing of when he left the academy, this provided enough reason to arrest him. After 8 months of uncertainty, police arrested Christopher Wilson. Although he had no connection to Mackenzie other than being classmates and had attended her memorial service to support friends, he was now in custody, charged with her murder. As detectives investigated his apartment and devices, the case took a more disturbing turn. A large discolored stain on the carpet was found to be Mackenzie's blood, contradicting Christopher's assertion that it was just spilled water. Authorities confirmed she had been killed in his home, but how she ended up there was still unclear. Mackenzie's father maintained that his daughter would never go anywhere with someone she didn't trust. Did she have more interactions with Christopher at school than anyone suspected? Was she manipulated or forced? No one could definitively answer these questions. On October 6th, Christopher was arrested on suspicion of second-degree murder and taken into custody on a $1 million bond. He pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. His court appearance attracted a very emotional crowd. His mother was in tears as he walked in, and many of his supporters firmly believed he was innocent. Among them were young women who had known Christopher personally and found it hard to accept that he could commit such a violent act. However, Mackenzie's friends and family felt that the doubts about Christopher's guilt were a painful reminder of the tragedy they faced. A close friend of Mackenzie emphasized to the public that Mackenzie was the real victim. She did not choose to be abducted, murdered, and thrown away by the Columbia River. She was a lively teenager with a bright future ahead of her. In December, the Cowell Task Force made a second arrest. Wilson's friend Tessa M. Schuleman was accused, but never charged, of helping Wilson cover up the crime. Instead, she was charged with obstruction of justice in an unrelated case. Detectives claimed that there were multiple photos found on Christopher's computer of Schuleman posing as a dead person at the spot in Christopher's apartment where Cowell's blood was found. Schuleman claimed that she did not know about the blood and that Christopher had told her to pose there. Investigators continued their work by submitting additional evidence to the lab and interviewing people connected to Christopher. However, they struggled to identify a motive for the crime. Some individuals involved in the case speculated that Mackenzie had been an easy target for someone mentally unstable. As the legal proceedings intensified, Christopher's defense team, led by prominent attorney John Henry Brown, previously associated with the notorious Ted Bundy, took aggressive measures to exclude critical evidence from the trial. Eventually, a judge decided that prosecutors could not present information about Wilson's work at local funeral homes or mention his Hannibal Lecter tattoo. The defense also introduced conspiracy theories, claiming that law enforcement had planted Mackenzie's blood in Wilson's apartment. They revisited a previous theory that implicated two men, Sam and Emmanuel, who had been accused by informant Liz Reed. Christopher's mother supported these theories, believing her son had been wrongfully accused. The defense pointed out that there was no DNA evidence connecting Christopher to Mackenzie's car or the knife found with her body. They also cast doubt on the authenticity of a ring that Liz claimed belonged to Mackenzie, noting the poor quality of the photos and that Mackenzie's family and friends did not recognize it. Nevertheless, the prosecutors grew more confident in their case. Christopher's charges were elevated to first-degree murder because they believed Mackenzie's death was planned. If found guilty, he could face up to 26 years in prison. In April 2011, a plea deal was offered to Christopher, a 6-year sentence for manslaughter. Initially, he declined the offer, insisting that he was innocent. Many were surprised by his decision since the evidence against him was strong and the plea deal seemed quite generous. As the trial date neared, Christopher changed his mind and wanted to accept the plea deal, citing jury survey results that indicated he might not get a fair trial. However, by then, the 6-year offer was no longer available. Mackenzie's family also asked Christopher to write a formal statement acknowledging his actions. In court, he read aloud, "He also recklessly caused the death of Mackenzie Cowell by strangulation and by stabbing her with a knife." When asked if this statement was true, he replied, "Yes." Despite this, he later claimed that his statement was false, stating he had only agreed to it to secure a plea deal. He continued to assert that he had been framed. Wilson ultimately pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter, first-degree robbery for stealing Mackenzie's phone, and assault in a different case. In May 2012, he was sentenced to 14 years and 3 months in prison but received credit for the time he had already served. After the hearing, in a heartfelt moment, the families of Mackenzie and Wilson embraced and exchanged apologies, showing a rare moment of compassion amidst the heartbreak of the case. Later, Christopher Scott Wilson tried to withdraw his guilty plea through the Washington Court of Appeals, but his appeal was unsuccessful. After serving 11.5 years, he was released from the Monroe Correctional Center on December 11, 2023 at the age of 43. Mackenzie Cowell, however, never lived past 17. In her short life, she left behind a legacy of determination, kindness, and ambition. Her bedroom remains nearly untouched, serving as a quiet tribute to the life she was creating. Her father, Reed Cowell, has placed a wind chime outside their home. When it jingles in the breeze, he feels as if he is hearing his daughter speak again. Mackenzie was his special gift from God, he says. Mackenzie will never leave his heart. Christy Wesselman was born on April 19, 1970, in Chicago, Illinois, USA. By 1985, her parents had divorced and moved away. After the divorce, Christy and her siblings stayed with their mother in Glen Ellen, a suburban town near Chicago with a population of fewer than 30,000. Christy has attended a variety of schools, but she has always made new friends quickly. The family chose to live in this quiet suburb because it was one of the safest areas in the region. During the 1980s, children felt safe playing outside without adult supervision, and not all residents locked their doors at night. Unfortunately, this peaceful time didn't last forever. Christy was a bright student with good grades and intended to go to college. She was also athletic, playing softball and volleyball, which helped her become popular among her peers. She had many friends. As she started high school, Christy became the class leader. She had a bold perspective on life for her age. In 1984, she even met then-President Ronald Reagan. While many were worried about this meeting, when her mother, Sandra, asked her if she was anxious, she confidently replied that she was not, stating that he was just a human being. Christy maintained a positive outlook throughout her life. In July 1985, during the summer vacation, Christy's mother, Sandra, was busy working to provide for her 3 children. Because she couldn't spend much time with them, she sent her youngest child, Christy, to all-day summer classes or camp. The children would return home by 5 or 6 p.m. On July 21, 1985, the family gathered for dinner after classes. Christy asked her mother if she could go to the supermarket to buy soda and a chocolate bar. Her mother agreed, believing it would be a quick trip since the store was only a 20-minute walk away. However, an hour passed, and she still hadn't returned. Initially, her mother wasn't worried, thinking Christy might have run into a classmate or decided to visit a friend, which wasn't unusual for an active teenager. As more time passed with no sign of Christy, her mother began to feel anxious. She decided to head to the supermarket herself to find out why Christy was delayed. On her way, she encountered several of Christy's classmates, but none had seen her. Once back home, she called all the friends she could think of, but no one had seen Christy. As darkness fell and it grew past 8 p.m., her concern turned into fear, prompting her to contact the police for help in the search. Law enforcement took this case very seriously from the start. They visited Christy's home to speak with Christy's mother and gather a description of her. They also compiled a complete list of friends and acquaintances she might have gone to see. The police visited all the addresses provided, but unfortunately, no one they spoke with had any useful information, leading to concerns that Christy might be missing. The next step for the police was to visit the last known location where she was seen, the supermarket. At the supermarket, they interviewed the security guard and staff members. A security guard, who was also a familiar neighbor to Christy's family, had known them for years and provided some useful information. She had met them shortly after they moved in and even helped care for the children when their mother was at work. According to the security officer, Christy had been at the supermarket around 6 p.m., where she bought a soda and a chocolate bar before leaving. There was nothing unusual about her visit. She was not accompanied by anyone, nor did anyone seem to follow her. Christy appeared cheerful as she left. Christy was supposed to return home with her shopping and had no intention of visiting anyone, which means she disappeared on her way back. What could have happened to her? Detectives interviewed several witnesses who confirmed seeing her with her shopping, and everything appeared to be normal. After that, no one saw Christy again. She had to walk quite a distance to get home. However, the locals knew that she often took a shortcut, and it seemed that she had taken that way. This shortcut involved a path through an area with trees and tall bushes. During the day, it felt quiet and safe, but it became unsettling after dark. Could someone dangerous have hidden there and kidnapped Christy? When the police learned about this path and went to investigate, it was 2 a.m. They searched but couldn't find anything useful. The search in the darkness seemed futile, so they decided to resume their efforts at dawn. When daylight came, detectives returned to search the route to the store. They quickly discovered a chocolate bar and soda that matched what Christy had bought. Nearby, they found a spot with trampled grass and broken bushes, indicating a struggle. It was clear why they hadn't found anything at night. Christy's body had been hidden in dense undergrowth, making it impossible to see in the poor lighting. Christy's mother, Sandra, took part in the search for her daughter and was among the first to discover her body. Shocked, she encountered the police officers at the scene. Her daughter's body showed signs of severe violence. There were stab wounds on her chest and neck, as well as many defensive injuries. Additionally, Christy had been abused. A major issue in the investigation was the lack of evidence. The killer had left no trace behind. Despite a detailed examination of the crime scene, nothing significant was discovered, suggesting that the perpetrator was an experienced criminal who knew how to cover their tracks. Christy wore a distinctive pearl ring that was missing. This ring was very valuable and had been a constant presence in her life. It was suspected that the killer took it. Detectives pursued this lead and visited local pawn shops, showing photos of the ring, but no one recognized it. They also reached out to the media and sought the public's help in identifying the jewelry, but no responses came in. The only piece of potentially useful evidence was the biological fluid found on Christy. However, at that time, forensic technology was not advanced enough to create a DNA profile for comparison. As a result, the collected materials were stored in archives. Detectives interviewed local residents and sought information from those who frequently used the nearby trail, hoping they might have seen or heard something. Unfortunately, no one could provide any useful information. Neighbors reported that they were near their homes around the time of the incident but did not hear anything unusual. It was suggested that Christy was attacked by someone she knew, which made her feel safe approaching him, leaving her with little chance to scream for help. Investigators spoke with Christie's mother, Sandra, to gather more details. They considered the possibility that she might have had issues with a boy who held a grudge, but this line of inquiry did not yield any substantial leads. She had no known romantic relationships, nor could any spurned admirers be identified. Detectives created a list of men and young individuals known for their abusive behavior who resided in the area. These individuals might have been present during the crime or had been released shortly before it occurred. Despite their efforts, the detectives made no progress. The collected evidence was filed away in an archive. The hope for a breakthrough lay in future advancements in technology and DNA research methods, suggesting that significant changes could be on the horizon. 3 years later, in 1988, new methods for DNA analysis and profiling emerged, enabling the comparison of collected materials with others. As a result, law enforcement was able to solve several cases that had previously stalled, including the murder of Christy Wesselman. However, when they compared the DNA profile obtained from the crime scene to the existing database, they found no matches, as the database was still small and didn't include all the DNA samples from convicted criminals. Since it was believed that the killer was familiar with Christy, authorities decided to collect DNA samples from her close neighbors in the suburban area. Many young men and women voluntarily cooperated, wanting to help solve the case. However, one local resident, Dana Henry, a 34-year-old man, refused to participate. He considered the investigation a waste of time and questioned the reliability of DNA profiling. Dana's refusal to cooperate raised suspicions about him, particularly because he lived near the location where Christy's body was discovered. Detectives tried to persuade him, but he remained resolute. Eventually, he agreed to voluntarily provide his DNA for profiling. Although he appeared to be a good family man, his actions shocked his neighbors, who could not connect his good image with the brutality of Christy's murder. Later, Dana spoke to the press and expressed frustration about being held in a cell as a suspect for 2 days. Law enforcement pressured him to provide DNA samples for examination, and he ultimately felt compelled to comply. Initially, the community believed that this would lead to a resolution of the case, but when the results came back, they showed no match. Dana was not a criminal. Throughout this ordeal, he maintained that he didn't want to provide his DNA because he believed he had the right to refuse. This situation drew more attention than Christy's murder itself. Dana began to seek justice, claiming that he suffered significant emotional distress due to the police's suspicions, which severely impacted his life. He endured days of hardship simply because he didn't want to cooperate with the authorities. After being cleared of suspicion, matters worsened. Upon returning home, his family, friends, and neighbors continued to suspect him of murder and abuse. Dana hired a lawyer, which cost him about $50,000, an enormous amount, especially since he struggled to keep up with his mortgage and was eventually evicted. This led to conflicts with his family and friends, although he eventually managed to convince them of his innocence after the police confirmed that he wasn't a criminal. Unfortunately, he lost almost all of his friends during this period. Part of the issue may have stemmed from the public's distrust of DNA analysis, as many people were unfamiliar with it. He filed a lawsuit against the police to seek compensation for the damages he suffered. However, his complaints were largely ignored. He was told that the situation could have been avoided if he had cooperated with the investigation from the start and provided his DNA like others did. Meanwhile, the investigation into Christy's death once again came to a standstill. In 1989, for years after Christy's murder, her family received a call from a man named Willis, whose identity was unknown to them. He claimed to know details about Christy's case from 1985. The family was hopeful about this information, but it led to no new developments. When they started to ignore him, he switched to sending letters. His behavior became increasingly obsessive, prompting Christy's mother to contact the police. Law enforcement investigated Willis's claims and discovered that he had been lying. Christie's mother then sought a restraining order against him. Once he was made aware of this restraining order, he ceased all contact. This situation added to the pain that Christie's family was already experiencing, as they had hoped he might be connected to the crime. Ultimately, it turned out that Willis had no involvement in Christie's murder. The next significant development occurred in 2000 when a database containing DNA information from registered criminals was already in place. This database was quite comprehensive. However, it primarily included individuals convicted of serious crimes, particularly focusing on those guilty of abuse and murder. Detectives were hopeful that this could help them solve the cold case, but unfortunately, no matches were found in the database, not even similar profiles. Investigators questioned how the brutal killer was able to attack Christie without leaving a trace, and whether he had committed similar crimes before. Such acts of extreme violence are rare, and those who commit them often re-offend. There was also a disturbing possibility that a serial killer was at work, a perpetrator who managed to evade capture and leave no evidence behind. If he is never caught, he could still be out there and pose a danger to others. The investigation once again hit a dead end, leading Christie's family to lose hope. It's heartbreaking to think that the mystery surrounding their daughter's death may never be solved. Progress finally came in 2015, 30 years after Christie's murder, when FBI agents contacted detectives in Illinois with a significant breakthrough. They reported a complete match with the criminal's DNA profile, which had been stored in the database in hopes of identifying the murderer. Authorities identified a 62-year-old man named Michael Jones. He was 32 in 1985, the year of the crime, and he had no connection to Christie or her family. They had never known him. Additionally, he did not reside in the city where the murder occurred at any time. Investigators sought a link between Michael and Christie but found none. He was unknown in the area, which indicated that the investigation had initially focused on Christie's immediate circle. If Michael had not committed another offense that led to his DNA being added to the database, he might never have been identified. Interestingly, he had previously been convicted of domestic violence, reported by his second wife. Although she suffered minor injuries, the incident did not seem serious enough for him to be flagged in the police database. This change became possible due to the efforts of the Illinois Attorney General, who has advocated since 2002 for the mandatory collection and storage of DNA profiles from all offenders, regardless of the crime's severity. The hard work of law enforcement ultimately led to the discovery of Christie's killer. Thanks to one person's initiative, Michael was uncovered as the perpetrator. Without this effort, he likely would have faced only a minor charge and continued living without facing consequences for the murder and abuse of a teenager. Michael had 2 ex-wives and several other relationships, prompting detectives to interview these women to gain insight into his character. They were cautious about charging him directly, but all the women reported that he had a problematic personality. A review of archived records revealed a long list of criminal offenses. His first major conviction dates back to the 1970s when he was arrested for assaulting a woman. However, the case was seemingly quieted down. A friend suggested that the victim may have been intimidated into retracting her complaint. This lack of accountability only encouraged further violence. A year later, Michael attacked another woman, who was his 27th target. He beat her severely, leaving her in critical condition. Fortunately, he eventually put her in her own car and abandoned her in the parking lot of a medical center, where she was found and received timely medical help. After her recovery, the victim promptly reported the incident to the police. As a result, Michael was declared a wanted man since he was nowhere to be found at his residence. The police began searching for Michael, but a few days later, he voluntarily turned himself in at the station. He could never explain why he had attacked, but he acknowledged that it was wrong. This may have been his way of attempting to lessen his guilt and potential punishment. He claimed he had mental health issues and needed assistance. He faced charges that could result in a prison sentence of 10 to 20 years. While incarcerated, Michael behaved well, became a model prisoner, and participated in treatment and rehabilitation programs. As a result, the parole board decided to release him after 6 years. In 1983, Michael was back on the streets of Illinois. Just 2 years later, he murdered Christy. If he had served the minimum sentence of at least 10 years that the prosecution had sought, she would never have encountered him. The woman who was attacked in 1977 was still alive in 2015 and met with the police. She was shocked to learn that Michael had been released early, as state law required that she be notified of his release due to the serious harm he had caused her. Unfortunately, she never received this notification. Had she been informed, she would have done everything in her power to oppose his early release, but the authorities did not provide her with that chance. Michael had moved away immediately after his release, so she had not seen him until that point. Now, she fully understood the danger he posed. The reasons behind the failure to notify her and why she was absent from the parole hearing remain unclear. A few months after his release in 1983, Michael married a young woman. She was already married with young children but quickly ended the relationship. When the police interviewed her, she revealed that Michael's behavior had driven her to leave. Her daughter reported that Michael had acted inappropriately while she was at work. Upon learning of this, the woman filed for divorce. Michael begged her not to go to the police, but she decided to report him. Fearing retaliation, she sought a restraining order, which provided her with some protection. Michael's next arrest occurred in 1999 after his girlfriend reported his inappropriate behavior. She regularly called the police due to domestic violence, but he only received a warning and a checkup without facing any consequences. In 2015, when the police arrested Michael, they met with him to discuss a matter but did not reveal the specific details. Michael remained calm and even joked with the officers, unaware that they were investigating the murder of Christy, for which they had a DNA match linking him to the crime. The police collected samples from him, claiming it was for another case, but their true aim was to confirm the DNA evidence. Throughout their interactions, Michael shared that he enjoyed riding motorcycles and often traveled far from his hometown. Investigators became suspicious that during his motorcycle trips, he might have passed through the suburbs where Christy lived. During one of these trips, it is possible that he noticed Christy walking alone, away from home. He might have followed her to the store and then ambushed her as she returned, attacking before she had a chance to react or scream. Tragically, she was beaten to death and abused. If the state attorney general hadn't initiated a new program to change the way DNA is collected, Christy's killer might have gone unpunished. When police uncovered the truth and charged Michael with Christy's murder, he was surprised but admitted his guilt, hoping for a lighter sentence through a plea bargain. Instead of facing life in prison, Michael was sentenced to 80 years, meaning his term will end in 2095. This is ironic because he was 64 at the time of his conviction, making it unlikely that he will live to see 144. Despite this sentencing, Christy's family had already accepted that they might never know what truly happened to their daughter. In the courtroom, Christy's mother, brother, and sister were visibly emotional. They shared with the jury that the most painful moments for them were the weddings and births that followed Christy's death. Although these events should have been fun, they turned bitter because Christy was no longer there to share the joy with them. Among those attending the trial was Dana Henry, who was still reeling from the fallout of being wrongfully accused. He wanted to confront the man who had committed the brutal crime for which he had been blamed. Dana maintained that his life had been ruined and blamed the justice system for Christy's murder, demanding compensation. He felt deeply aggrieved that he had never even received an apology from the authorities who had subjected him to harsh treatment in a cell. The only physical reminder of Christy that remained with her family was a piece of her communion dress, which her sister wore as a wedding brooch. She stated that she would never forget Christy and would always keep her memory alive. The Albaran family was a tightly knit, multi-generational unit residing at 560 North Hamilton Avenue in Indianapolis. At the heart of the family were Emma Valdez, 46, and her husband, Alberto Covarrubias, 56, who worked hard to create a loving, stable home for their children and grandchildren. Emma was known as a devoted mother, grandmother who united the family, while Alberto provided a consistent and supportive presence. Their blended family included Emma's children from a previous relationship, Flora Albaran, 22, and Magno Albaran, 29, as well as their two young sons, Alberto Jr., 11, and David, 8. The youngest family member was Flora's 5-year-old son, Luis. The family was well regarded in their community for being friendly, engaged, often taking part in local events and building strong relationships with their neighbors. Their children attended local schools, and their home frequently served as a gathering place for family celebrations. Despite facing various challenges, Emma and Alberto worked diligently to provide their children with opportunities for a better future. They emphasized the importance of education and resilience as core values. They faced difficult circumstances but managed to turn their situation around. Emma and Alberto always welcomed anyone into their home, unaware that one day, someone would enter, change their lives forever. Desmond Turner, 29, a petty criminal, became convinced that a large sum of money or banned substance was hidden in a safe at a house on Hamilton Avenue. This belief arose from local rumors within the banned substance community of which he was a part, even though the source of those rumors was unclear. Hoping for a quick and easy score, he asked James Stewart, 31, to join him in the robbery, thinking that having a partner would boost their confidence and ensure a smooth operation. Turner's knowledge of the neighborhood likely played a role in his decision. He seemed to have some prior connection to the family or their home, possibly through personal acquaintances or hearsay. It's also possible that someone he trusted misled him intentionally, directing him to this particular house. Some people believe Turner may have misinterpreted unrelated bits of information, leading him to mistakenly believe it was a high-value target. Driven by desperation, he viewed this as an opportunity to escape his difficult life. After a history of minor criminal activities, he was ready to take a risk for what he believed would be a significant reward. Stewart agreed to join the plan. However, despite their preparation, Turner's plan was built on incorrect assumptions and false information. Ultimately, their plan, fueled by misguided ambition, went far beyond what Turner or Stewart had ever expected. The initial plan set by Turner and Stewart was clear, straightforward: carry out a robbery, not a murder. Their goal is not to harm anyone but to steal anything they can find, especially cash or valuables. The house at 560 North Hamilton Avenue was the target. Turner and Stewart anticipated that the house would be empty or that anyone present would be an easy target to overpower quickly. They may have thought that the family would be away or at least off guard, allowing them to carry out the robbery without interference. However, once they entered the home, the unexpected happened. Within moments of being inside, their plans started to unravel. The presence of others in the home, combined with a quick confrontation, immediately changed the dynamic from that of a typical robbery to something much more complicated and dangerous. As they started to search the house for the safe, the situation quickly became more intense. The unexpected return of Magno turned the entire plan upside down. Magno had just come back home when he found two strangers inside. Armed, he felt an immediate need to protect his family, and in a split second, he drew his weapon. This shift caught the robbers by surprise. Up until that point, things seemed easy. Now they faced an armed threat that forced them into a corner. In a tense and unpredictable moment, Stewart acted on instinct, shooting Magno in defense of himself. After Magno fell, Turner and Stewart's options dwindled rapidly. With one man in the house now dead, the fear of being caught or identified was at the top of their list of concerns. Instead of fleeing or retreating, Turner made a decision based on panic. He might have realized that leaving any witnesses alive could eventually lead to their capture. Fearing the consequences of leaving the scene and not fully understanding the extent of what they had already done, Turner moved methodically through the house, targeting each family member he came across with a chilling sense of purpose. His actions unfolded without hesitation as he sought to eliminate any potential threats in his path. Flora, Magno's sister, was one of the first to encounter Turner. She was instantly confronted with the brutality of the situation. Her life was taken quickly. As he continued his relentless and cold execution of his plan, each family member became another victim in the nightmare that had unfolded. Next, Emma, the Albaran family's mother, and her husband, Alberto, tried desperately to protect their loved ones. Both understood that something horrific had taken place and knew they had to act fast to stop it. They attempted to fight back or intervene. They wanted to protect their family at all costs. However, their efforts were futile. Despite their bravery in the face of overwhelming violence, they were quickly overpowered. Turner left no time for the family to defend themselves. Every movement was executed with precision, marking the house with blood. It was clear that no one would survive in this house on Hamilton Avenue that day as Turner carried out each execution with brutal efficiency, securing the tragic fate of those who tried to fight back. Most devastating of all was Turner's decision to eliminate even the youngest members of the family, leaving no one alive. Alberto Jr., only 11 years old, David, who was 8, and little Luis, just 5, had no chance against Turner's cold determination. What might have been a robbery that spiraled out of control quickly devolved into a mass murder, marking the house with unspeakable tragedy. Turner's ruthless actions stripped the Albaran family of their future, severing the lives of 7 people. Turner and Stewart destroyed an entire family. The family members understood the violence happening around them. Unable to escape it, they were all attacked execution style, so they saw their assailants up close and knew what was happening. This massacre was not driven by pure hatred but by a cold, calculating desire to cover his tracks, no matter the cost. The loss of control over the situation, paired with their unwavering decision to keep killing, ensured that the entire household would never be alive. The spree lasted only a few minutes, but its impact was immeasurable. After carrying out the brutal murders, Turner and Stewart attempted to flee the crime scene as quickly as possible. Their primary goal at this point was to escape without leaving any trace that could be used to identify them or connect them to the massacre. They made their way out of the house, likely in hurried panic, still reeling from the violent acts they had just committed. In the chaos that followed, the robbers didn't take the time to cover their tracks. They exited the Hamilton Avenue house, made their way to their vehicle to drive away. Turner and Stewart had already planned their escape, knowing they needed to lay low for a while. In the days following the killings, they scattered and kept a low profile, hoping the police would focus on other possible suspects rather than immediately drawing connections to them. However, the killers were eventually tracked down thanks to a combination of physical evidence, witness testimonies, and diligent investigative work. The investigation into the massacre was initially slow given the lack of obvious clues at the crime scene. As the bodies were discovered and autopsies revealed the brutal nature of the killings, the police began looking for potential links to local criminals. Turner, with his criminal background and prior connections to the neighborhood, became a person of interest for the authorities. His involvement in local banned substance circles, combined with his known associations, brought him under suspicion. The breakthrough came when authorities pieced together information from multiple sources. Witnesses who had seen the 2 men near the crime scene before and after the murders helped identify them. Additionally, physical evidence, including fingerprints or DNA, was found at the scene, pointing investigators directly to Turner and Stewart. When they matched this information with witness statements, they were able to link both men to the crime and issue warrants for their arrest. Eventually, Turner and Stewart were found and taken into custody, followed an intense manhunt. Once in custody, Turner and Stewart confessed to the killings. However, that was just the beginning. The aftermath of the Hamilton Avenue massacre brought not only grief and fear to the local community but also the legal proceedings that followed, which exposed the shocking nature of the crime. Desmond Turner and James Stewart faced a variety of charges related to the murder of 7 people, including charges of murder, confinement for each of the victims, robbery, and burglary. The legal landscape was marred by a long and contentious trial. Turner was considered the mastermind behind the killings, both in terms of planning and execution. He faced nearly 24 charges ranging from murder to robbery. His trial began in October 2009 when the Marion County prosecutors presented their case. The prosecution's approach was methodical, laying out the robbery plot that led to the murders. According to the state's case, Turner and Stewart broke into the home at 560 North Hamilton Avenue with the intention of robbing the residents in search of a rumored stash of cocaine and money. The horrific events that followed were not spurred by any direct threat to Turner or Stewart. Rather, they resulted from their decision to eliminate anyone who might recognize them or who could pose a risk to their escape. One crucial aspect of Turner's trial was the fact that he faced the possibility of the death penalty. Just weeks before his trial began, this option was ultimately dismissed in exchange for Turner waiving his right to a jury trial. Turner chose to have a judge rule on his guilt rather than risk the uncertainties of a jury trial. One of the significant challenges faced by the state in prosecuting Turner was the lack of physical evidence directly linking him to the crime scene. While prosecutors could piece together the events through witness statements and circumstantial evidence, they struggled to find concrete DNA or other physical proof tying Turner directly to the murders. This gap in the physical evidence provided Turner's attorneys with grounds to challenge the prosecution's case, but it was not enough to sway the judge's decision. To counter the lack of physical evidence, prosecutors emphasized the witness testimonies, which painted a vivid picture of Turner and Stewart's actions before, during, and after the crime. On November 20, 2009, throughout the trial, Turner maintained his innocence, arguing that he was merely in the wrong place at the wrong time and was unfairly implicated in the deaths. However, this did little to sway the jury or the judge, who had ample evidence to confirm Turner's role in the killings. Desmond Turner was convicted of 7 counts of murder, 7 counts of criminal confinement, burglary, and robbery. He was sentenced to life without parole plus 88 years. James Stewart's trial was set to begin after Turner's, with jury selection scheduled. Unlike Turner, Stewart opted to have his case heard by a jury of 12 plus 4 alternates. Stewart's defense strategy differed significantly from Turner's. Stewart stuck firmly to his claim of innocence, opting instead to challenge the evidence against him and present a defense based on an alibi. His attorney, Richard Buchery, argued that Stewart was not present at the scene on the night of the murders and sought to cast doubt on the reliability of the testimonies that connected Stewart to the crime. This alibi defense placed the focus of Stewart's legal fight on trying to discredit the state's witnesses. Although Stewart had an opportunity to provide his defense, the evidence against him remained strong. Prosecutors believed that Stewart's handgun was responsible for at least one of the fatal shots, while the rest of the bullets came from Turner's assault rifle. Turner's defense attorneys tried to exploit a long-standing neighborhood feud to inject reasonable doubt into the case. Specifically, they pointed to a feud involving Valdez's son, Magno, who had no direct involvement in the incident but had been caught up in a dispute with another local family. Turner's lawyers claimed that the Albaran family's ongoing problems with local residents could have led to a mistaken accusation and false witness testimonies. However, Judge Robert Altus dismissed these theories, pointing out that the defense had failed to provide a reasonable alternative theory of innocence. This weakened the defense's argument. Finally, James Stewart was convicted of 7 counts of murder, 6 counts of criminal confinement, robbery, burglary, carrying a handgun without a license, and being a repeat offender. He was sentenced to 425 years on January 6, 2010. Both men have promised to appeal. Back to the house in the massacre, on August 23, 2008, just over 2 years after the killings, the house was set on fire in an arson attack. This deliberate act of destruction was likely meant to erase the physical reminder of the massacre that had shocked the entire community. The house was left to burn, with its walls no longer a home, but instead a shell of a horrific past. Ultimately, the house was demolished on July 16, 2010. The decision to destroy it was part of the effort to remove the last remnants of the traumatic event. What had been a place of family gatherings and memories was reduced to rubble, offering no trace of its violent past. However, something this dark can't really be fully erased. 7-year-old Jasmine Albaran's life was forever altered. She had repeatedly begged her mother to allow her to visit her father, Magno Albaran, on that fateful night, but Jasmine was told she couldn't go. It was a decision that unknowingly saved her life. The following morning, her mother, Kim Fisher, received a phone call informing her of a horrific event at the home of Jasmine's father and his family. At that address, the worst mass killing in Indianapolis's history had taken place, with 7 people, including Jasmine's father and several close relatives, gunned down by 2 men. Kim rushed to inform Jasmine, shattering her daughter's world. Jasmine, now an adult, said, "I went from this happy, carefree kid to someone I didn't even know." The sudden brutal loss of almost her entire family left Jasmine in shock, and she struggled to understand why the massacre had occurred. The trauma not only changed her emotional state but also her entire outlook on life. The grief did not cease with the conviction of the killers. Jasmine's family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. For more than a year, Jasmine's mother, Kim Fisher, had been locked within the walls of their home, unable to find the will to leave. Over time, with the help of therapy and medication, the pain began to subside, though it would never be fully gone. Kim and Jasmine leaned on their faith to help navigate the monumental grief. Jasmine learned that her father and his family would have wanted her to forgive and move on rather than become consumed by the pain and anger from their violent deaths. "I don't live with evil in my heart," Jasmine said as she reflected on her ability to forgive the men responsible. "There are individuals who should not be made fun of, as this can be dangerous for life." This is what happened in today's story. Todd Kohlhepp was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, USA, on March 7, 1971. When he was only 2 years old, his parents decided to divorce. He stayed to live with his mother. Sometime later his mother remarried. However, his relationship with his stepfather also developed very poorly. Todd always faced significant social difficulties. He could not fully communicate with his peers and other people. He viewed everyone he met as a potential rival. Even in kindergarten, he constantly argued with other children, frequently fought, and broke their belongings. Todd behaved aggressively in any situation, as if he were unable to control his emotions, including anger. At home, he was also unfriendly. From an early age, Todd began exhibiting a history of cruelty to animals. He killed a goldfish using bleach and shot a dog with an air rifle. His sadistic behavior became deeply ingrained in him. Even in his early school years, his mother moved to South Carolina with her new husband. She decided to divorce him in 1982. The very next year, she began a relationship with another man and married him. Todd was 12 years old at the time. Despite his young age, he became a source of conflict in the house almost daily. He was so uncontrollable, aggressive that his mother and stepfather feared for their lives. They placed him in a psychiatric clinic. However, this did not help much. Todd expressed dissatisfaction with living in South Carolina, stating that he wanted to move to live with his biological father, with whom he had not communicated or seen since the divorce. His father lived in Arizona. Perhaps Todd thought that moving would allow him to start anew and have a fresh perspective on life. After moving to Tempe, Arizona, it quickly became apparent that there would be no improvement in his behavior. His biological father described him as a person capable of feeling only anger. He also repeatedly ended up in psychiatric treatment. Despite all efforts, the situation only worsened. In November 1986, Todd's first serious crime. At that time, he was only 15 years old. One Saturday, he went outside and met a 14-year-old neighbor named Christy Granado. He tricked her, kidnapped her, then took her to his father's house, where he taped her mouth shut, tied her up, put a gun to her head, and abused her. The attack was unprovoked. He had barely communicated with the victim before, only exchanging greetings when they accidentally saw one another. After the attack, he threatened to kill Christy, shoot her siblings, and her entire family if she told anyone. Todd scared her so much that she genuinely wanted to remain silent. His cruel and manipulative personality was already formed by then. He was so confident in his own importance that he believed he could get away with any crime. Christy had no idea that her family was already worried and actively searching for her. Shortly before the attack, her parents had taught their children how to behave in an emergency. Christy's younger brother became worried when he couldn't find her at home and called the police. Fortunately, Todd released his victim. She returned home just as her brother was speaking with the patrol. Christy was forced to tell them what had happened. Todd Kohlhepp was arrested. From the very beginning, he showed absolutely no concern for his victim. He was only interested in how long he would go to prison. The lawyer defending him claimed that his client would not harm others in the future and that he had simply made a mistake. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. During this time, he radically changed his behavior. His cruel nature was almost not evident. He was a model prisoner, but in reality, he was simply skillfully hiding his inner struggles and innate cruelty. In August 2001, Todd was released at the age of 30. He didn't waste his time in prison. He went to college to study computer technology. After his release from prison, he decided to return to South Carolina because he wanted to be with his mother. Now she can't refuse. While incarcerated, he seemed to have taken the path of correction and decided to reintegrate into society. To do this, he needed to find a decent job. However, he still struggled to get along with others and found it difficult to work in a team, so he decided to pursue freelance work, changing jobs frequently, mainly as a designer. 5 years after his release, in 2006, he applied for a real estate license in South Carolina. In response to this request, they informed him that they could not provide a license because he was registered as a criminal prone to abuse assault. It seemed that he had no chance to start his own business. However, he learned to hide his cruel nature very well. He became cunning and strategic. Todd scheduled a personal meeting to explain his situation in detail, downplaying the extent of his previous cruelty. He attributed everything to a simple misunderstanding with his girlfriend and his age, explaining that everything happened by mutual consent but that the girl was simply offended by him and decided to teach him a lesson. That was why he was put in prison. His plan worked. This lie allowed him to convince the licensing agency that it was merely a misunderstanding and that he wanted a second chance. By June 2006, Todd received a real estate agent's license. A criminal with a criminal record opened his own business and continued to lead the life of a respected model citizen who was simply deceived in his youth. His business developed and brought in a good income. Todd became wealthy and successful. Interestingly, at the same time, he became a passionate collector of weapons, acquiring many pistols and rifles. By his own admission, he inherited this passion from his father, who also collected such items. This interest was consistent with Todd's other hobbies. He loved everything that evoked associations with strength and power. He even obtained a pilot's license. He was fond of motorcycles and fast cars. Outwardly, he appeared to be a successful person with a very charismatic and strong character. Todd was not the only successful person in the city. In November 2003, 30-year-old Scott Ponder opened a motorcycle dealership, assisted in this business by his 52-year-old mother, Beverly Guy, who worked alongside him. Scott, like Todd, had a passion for this type of transport, and this business became a dream come true for him. He was running a thriving enterprise. Todd often dropped in to admire the bikes and bought several. Scott's bride, Melissa, moved in with him in 2002. They got married in January 2003, and in November of that year, his wife found out she was pregnant. They were about to have their first child and seemed like a happy couple going through the best period of their lives. However, the Ponders had no idea how dramatically everything could change in just a few days. On November 6, 2003, Scott and his wife, as usual, went to his dealership. His wife dropped him off in the parking lot. They made eye contact as she drove by, and Scott blew her a kiss. Melissa headed to the medical center for her first ultrasound. It was such an important and exciting event for her, but her husband Scott was unable to accompany her, although he hoped to see and hear his baby's heartbeat. Melissa waited for her husband to return home to tell her how everything went and what the doctor said. But instead, at 3 p.m., Melissa received a call from an employee of the center, who reported the news of a shooting at the bike shop. Melissa was on the other side of town but dropped everything and rushed there. There was a lot of commotion at the scene. About 10 police cars had gathered, the road was blocked, and they wouldn't let Melissa's in, even when she told them her husband Scott was there. Within a couple of minutes of arriving, Melissa was informed that her husband had been shot during a robbery at the dealership. She didn't understand what was happening and wanted to contact her husband's mother, who was also working that day. It turned out that Beverly had also been attacked. A total of 4 people died in the massacre. The third victim was 29-year-old Brian Lucas, and the fourth had not yet been identified at the time of Melissa's arrival. It was later discovered that he was a 26-year-old mechanic named Chris Sherbert who worked at the dealership. All the victims were attacked in cold blood at point-blank range, but the identity of the killer remained unknown at that time. In that moment, Melissa's world collapsed. She was left without the support of her husband and his mother. The family business was also under threat. Despite all the difficulties that had befallen Melissa, she managed to pull herself together and cope with the challenges. 7 months later, in June 2004, Melissa gave birth to a boy whom she named Scott Jr. in honor of her deceased husband. All this time, she desperately wanted to know who had taken her loving husband from her and their child. Law enforcement officers continued to investigate the high-profile murders. Based on the degree of cruelty, it was believed that the perpetrator must have known the victims personally and had a strong motive, but there were no specific suspects. Detectives analyzed connections in the business of relatives and friends of the victims, but the likely perpetrator could not be identified. Nothing was stolen from the shop, and all witnesses to the crime were murdered. The cameras at the dealership were not working that day. Finally, towards the end of 2004, unexpected progress was made. Melissa was called to the station, expecting detectives to report that they knew the perpetrator's name. Instead, she found herself in an interrogation room. Detectives explained that she had accidentally left her son Scott Jr.'s diaper at the dealership a few months earlier. The police compared the boy's DNA with the materials found at the crime scene, and it turned out that they did not match the samples of her deceased husband. This led to the assumption that Melissa had given birth to a child not from her husband but from her lover, which meant she had a motive to get rid of him. Melissa was so stunned by the fact that she had gone from being a victim to the main suspect that she even offered to exhume her husband's body. She was convinced that only he could be the father of their child, and this should prove her innocence. Melissa was so convincing that the police decided to check everything again. It turned out that they had indeed made a mistake. The test tubes with the materials from Scott and Brian, whose DNA was collected at the motorcycle shop, had been incorrectly labeled, so the results did not match. Melissa's son was, in fact, Scott's. Although the police admitted their mistake, the damage to Melissa's reputation was enormous. The local community closely followed the events surrounding the bloody massacre at the motorcycle shop. Many eagerly picked up on new rumors regarding Melissa's alleged lover, and gossip quickly spread throughout the area. People began to look askance at her, whisper about her supposed infidelities. Everyone avoided her and her son. All of this finally broke Melissa's spirit. Melissa did not want this to affect her child's relationships with other children in kindergarten and school. When she became a suspect, caused serious damage to her reputation. Now, she decided that the only way to start all over again was to return to her small homeland. Meanwhile, the detectives again found themselves at a dead end. There was no suspect in the shooting, and the crime remained unsolved for over a decade. It was believed that the attack on the center could have been carried out by a disgruntled employee or client who simply vented his anger in such an extreme way. However, none of the employees were prone to conflicts. Scott created a very comfortable environment there. They could not find any suspicious disgruntled clients. It was simply impossible to understand the motive of the attacker. During this period, Todd, on the contrary, flourished. He honed his skills, crafted his career, and became one of the best real estate agents in Spartanburg, South Carolina. This continued until 2015. Now, the 44-year-old realtor had purchased a huge plot of land in Woodruff. It seemed that he was going to build a solid house, which is why he bought such a large plot. After the purchase, he ordered local hunters to stay away from his land. He truly intended to radically transform this place, but not quite in the way many imagined. On December 22, 2015, 29-year-old Johnny Joe Coxey and his 25-year-old wife, Megan Lee McCraw Coxey, were reported missing. They were a newlywed couple who, unlike other successful individuals in this story, had experienced many problems. In the past, both had suffered from addiction to illegal substances. They had a child who was taken away by social services. Law enforcement officers searched the troubled couple, but to no avail. Even an analysis of their mobile phones did not yield any results. It was probable that their means of communication were not working, and they had practically no relatives or close friends who would care about them. Therefore, the missing persons report was received quite late. No one particularly pressured the police to look for them. There were no volunteers to form search teams for Johnny and Megan. The police had few resources, so the search was very sluggish. There were no leads. The investigation reached a dead end, and everyone calmed down. They simply stopped looking for them. On September 4, 2016, a police officer, the father of the Carver family, called the station and reported that his 32-year-old son, Charles David Carver, was missing. He had a great relationship with his son. They communicated daily using phone calls and instant messengers. As a rule, they talked about their lives and sports. The last message that he received from his son was about football. The silence lasted too long. The complete lack of activity from his son was very alarming because this had never happened before. The Carvers tried to find out the fate of Charles, but it turned out that he was not the only one missing. His new girlfriend, named Carla Brown, had also disappeared. Just 5 days after meeting for the first time at Walmart, both went missing. They were not dependent people and had no problems. A spontaneous escape was ruled out as it would have been pointless. The police began checking the mobile phone data of Charles and Carla. At the end of August, Charles and Carla had been contacted by a realtor. He was familiar with Charles and communicated with him periodically through pages on social networks. Before that, he had already offered work on his site. This time, he did the same. However, there were no more leads. Initially, this contact was simply discarded, but the days of searching turned into weeks. No information about the young couple appeared, so more thorough checks began. This was largely due to the activity of the families of the missing couple. Until October 2016, it seemed like another dead end. Finally, detectives analyzed the location data from the mobile phones of Charles and Carla. It turned out that the last time they were active was not far from Todd's territory, where he had invited they to work, making the situation appear suspicious. So, 2 months after the disappearances of Charles and Kala, on November 3, 2016, the police went to Todd's property. One group went to his house, which was located on one part of his large plot of land, while the second group quickly located a metal storage container standing alone in a remote area, which was not visible from the road. Its green color blended with the foliage, rendering the container inconspicuous. After listening, the officers realized that someone alive was inside the container. It took a considerable amount of time to open all the locks and cut the chains blocking the entrance. When law enforcement officers finally entered the container, they found Kala chained inside, exhausted, emaciated, but alive. Charles was not visible. She quickly explained that he had died long ago. According to her, when Todd offered her and her boyfriend a part-time job then brought them to his property, he attacked them as soon as they got out of the car. He attacked Charles 3 times in the chest, and Charles died instantly. Todd then chained Kala and left her in the container, where she spent 2 months. When Todd was informed that a captive had been found on his land, he feigned surprise and tried to deny everything. However, this was futile because the victim of his torture detailed that it was he who had attacked them. Kala Brown was rescued after 65 days in captivity. She said that Todd abused her twice a day. He was very cruel, often torturing and treating her like his possession. Kala endured all this because she was afraid to resist, simply hoped that they were looking for her and would soon find her, as happened. Kala was sure that if she had resisted, she would have been killed just like her boyfriend. Inspecting the area around the container, the police discovered 3 shallow graves. In one was Charles's body, and in the other 2 were additional bodies, all of whom were dressed. Kala had no idea about the other victims. Only an analysis of dental records confirmed that these were Megan and Johnny, who had disappeared a year ago. They could not find a motive for the kidnappings and torture, as there was no connection between the victims. They did not even know each other. Only the criminal himself could solve this mystery. Todd Kohlhepp was arrested and put behind bars. During the very first interrogation, law enforcement officers tried to extract details of the crimes committed and get him to confess. It turned out that Todd genuinely wanted to cooperate with the authorities, but instead of discussing the bodies and the living girl found on his land, he began to recount a different story. With genuine pride, Todd told the story of a shooting that had occurred 13 years ago. He admitted that he loved motorcycles and often stopped by the dealership where Scott worked with his family. Scott had come to know him well due to his frequent visits. Todd bought a motorcycle there, which he later disliked, and began to consider other options for motorcycles for a long time. Eventually, he decided to return his motorcycle, but Scott refused to take it back and even laughed at him, which greatly angered Todd. Although he did not show his anger, resentment was building inside him. At some point, he decided to visit the shop to take revenge. On November 6, 2003, he went to the showroom as usual, walked between the rows of motorcycles, waiting until no customers were left. Then, he pulled out a gun and began attacking the employees in cold blood. The last ones were Brian and Scott, who managed to react and tried to run, but Todd's bullets caught up with them right outside the front door. After this, Todd was able to escape, which made him feel invincible, exacerbating the situation. He was thirsty for blood, and new crimes were only a matter of time. When discussing the attacking in the motorcycle store, he showed no signs of regret. On the contrary, he appeared proud of his actions. Like many serial criminals, he wanted to impress others. For him, the murders became a way to seek attention. After all these revelations, detectives contacted Melissa, Scott's widow. After 13 years, they finally managed to understand what had happened at the family dealership and who was behind the attacking. Most of all, she was struck by the impotence of the authorities, as the detectives had even tried to accuse her at one point but could not take action until blood was spilled again. If the police had not visited Todd's land in search of Charles and his girlfriend, the shooting case might never have been revealed. During interrogations, Todd cannot be silenced. He began to describe with pleasure the details of other crimes, including the murder of newlyweds. The last place where Johnny and Megan saw each other alive was on Todd's property. He also offered them work on the site. Naturally, they, experiencing financial difficulties, eagerly accepted. Todd did not deal with them immediately. Instead, he lulled their guard by offering them simple work for good pay. He simply took advantage of the situation so they would do more work on the site. However, after their first encounter with him, they was doomed. Initially, he scrutinized them and quickly realized they were the ideal victims that no one would search for. As it turned out, on December 19, 2015, Todd, who had already built trust, invited they back to his property to clear away some rubble. He personally took them and drove to a distant part of his land. As soon as they both got out of the car, the first thing he did was attack Johnny. Johnny died instantly, leaving his wife in shock, waiting for her own fate. However, Todd did not want to kill her immediately, just as he had with Kala. There was a large metal container used as a mobile warehouse on the property. Now it had become a torture chamber for Megan. She spent about a week there, repeatedly trying to escape, even setting fires to it. He admitted that she behaved like a wild animal trapped in a cage, creating too many problems, prompting him to get rid of her. He attacked her in cold blood in the back of the head. Unlike her, Kala proved to be obedient, which ultimately saved her life. Next to the container, which served as an improvised prison, was already Johnny's grave. He dug another hole in which he buried Megan. After that, he returned to his work as a real estate agent and acted as if nothing had happened, all while searching for a new victim for his torture. Following Todd's confessions, the list of his crimes included at least 7 murders and the kidnapping. Naturally, investigations and trials for all incidents would require significant time and resources. Therefore, Todd was offered life in prison instead of the death penalty if he formally pleaded guilty to all charges. Todd accepted the offer. On May 26, 2017, Todd Kohlhepp pleaded guilty to 7 counts of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of abuse assault. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. In July 2019, the victims of Todd's crimes participated in civil and wrongful death hearings aiming to receive compensation from the company owned by Todd. Kala described in detail her experience in that ill-fated container, recounting the constant violence and pain she endured. While Kala shared her story, Todd listened attentively without showing any emotion. She did not take her eyes off him. This was a significant moment of revelation for her. After Kala finished telling her story, Todd's lawyer asked how much compensation she wanted, but she could not name a specific figure. She didn't care about that. Her main goal was to see the criminal, look him in the eye, and overcome her fears. Kala understood that no amount of money could bring back the lives lost or restore the 2 months of freedom that were stolen from her through torture. Following this, there were hearings initiated by the family of Scott Ponder. His widow, Melissa, also described in detail the pain she experienced due to her husband's death, including what it was like to raise their son without a father. The most powerful moment in this process occurred when the child, who had just turned 13, bravely walked past the killer, looked him straight in the eyes, and said that he forgave him. Melissa was proud of her son, believing that if his father had survived, he would have definitely appreciated such an act. The child demonstrated an extraordinary strength and maturity for his age. In August 2020, Todd's property was sold at auction, and the proceeds were transferred to the families of the victims. The story of the serial killer did not end there. Since then, he has repeatedly claimed that there were more victims, mentioning at least 2 additional murders. However, he has consistently avoided providing details. The identities of these possible victims and their bodies have not yet been found. The investigation remains ongoing. Police believe that he may have used his job as a realtor to gain access to people, breaking into their homes to commit crimes. However, there has been no confirmation of these theories. Acquaintances described Todd in various ways. One client who sold him a house remembered him as an extremely sociable person and a professional in his field, although he often talked about firearms and flirted with her. Another employee described Todd as hot-tempered and aggressive, unable to control himself. A colleague noted that he frequently watched adult films even while at work. It was reported that he often visited a restaurant where he pestered waitresses. It turned out that one of his victims, Megan, worked at that establishment. This may have been how he met her. Todd posted disturbing reviews on a marketplace. For instance, in a review of a folding shovel, he advised keeping it in the car in case one needed to bury bodies and had forgotten the regular shovel at home. In another review, he mentioned a knife, stating that he hadn't stabbed anyone with it yet but hoped to do so with such a high-quality tool. In a review of a padlock, he wrote, "Reliable locks, there should be 5 of them on the container to protect against escape." These reviews sounded ominous at the time, but no one paid attention to them. Throughout this period, not only Todd was accused, but also his friend, Dustin Lawson, who was considered an accomplice. Despite knowing Todd's criminal background, from 2012 to 2016, Lawson purchased at least 12 guns and 5 silencers for him. As it turned out, it was thanks to Lawson that a substantial collection of firearms was amassed, which was used for the murders. In 2018, Lawson pleaded guilty to 36 charges related to these transactions and received a total sentence of 8 years and 3 months in prison. Dustin Lawson was released on November 13, 2023, while Todd Kohlhepp remains behind bars and is not expected to be released. Monday, May 5, 1997, was a public holiday. Schools were closed, and the children were not studying. It was cool and raining that day. Despite this, Jamie Lavis and his brother decided to go outside to play with other children. They lived in a quiet and peaceful suburb, in an area of Manchester called Openshaw, UK, where everyone knew each other well, so their parents did not worry about their safety, only occasionally glanced at them from the window. The brothers were almost unrestricted in their movements along the nearby street, where there was a supermarket, a bus stop, and several friends lived. Therefore, for several hours, no one suspected anything until Jamie's 11-year-old brother came home for afternoon tea without Jamie. His older brother said that they had warmed up in the shop while choosing sweets in the morning. However, at that time, no one was worried about Jamie. He was a mischievous child who could go out alone without his brother, but he always returned home in the evening because he was afraid of the dark. His mother, Karen, was sure that her son had met one of his friends, got carried away playing, and would return a little later. But when it began to get dark and the family gathered at the table for dinner, Jamie was still not there, which looked strange. Then, Karen sent one of her older daughters to look for Jamie, but the 12-year-old sister returned empty-handed. By the time Karen started to worry, her husband, John, returned home. He reassured her, saying that Jamie had most likely stayed with friends and would be back soon. Another hour passed, but the situation had not changed. Then the boy's parents went to look for him on their own. It was already completely dark. They checked the places he most often visited and played with friends, visiting several acquaintances, but they found no trace of Jamie. Around 10 p.m., Jamie's parents decided to go to the police and report that their 8-year-old son was missing. 2 days earlier, on Saturday, May 3rd, Jamie had also run away. He had returned unannounced late in the evening with pockets full of sweets. Jamie had also missed dinner that time, which had scared his family. Because of this, Jamie's father had punished him, but the boy did not want to stay home all day, so he had run away again on Sunday. However, his parents quickly caught him, brought him home, and the punishment was decided to be cancelled. Some of the boy's friends said that he did not want to return home after that incident because he was afraid of being grounded. Therefore, it seemed that Jamie was just outside somewhere, fearing punishment from his parents. The police began searching for him along the narrow streets of Openshaw. At that time, it was one of the poorest areas of Manchester, characterized by tangled streets, dense development, and a large number of abandoned houses and factories. Therefore, Jamie had many options for where to hide. Naturally, this also created an additional danger, as the buildings were often used by criminals to hide. The sheer number of abandoned buildings meant that the authorities faced a difficult and large-scale task in finding Jamie, which required a lot of time. After examining several dozen empty buildings and houses over the following days, it was decided to hold a press conference via television to inform the public about the disappearance of Jamie. Jamie's relatives still hoped that the child had simply run away, fearing punishment. The press conference was also attended by Karen, who begged her son to return home and promised that he would not get into any trouble. However, this did not help in any way. Days passed without any new information about Jamie. The city police involved more officers in the search operation, including specially trained dogs. The area was inspected with the help of a helicopter, and a team of divers explored the river flowing through Manchester. This search and rescue operation became the largest in the city, and information about it became widely known among locals due to the media's activity. Many volunteers joined the search. Crowds of concerned citizens took to the streets and tried to help find Jamie. However, the information did not provide any new clues. Jamie's disappearance was a significant blow to the Lavis family. His father even quit his job at Manchester Airport to devote more time to searching for his son. His mother also could not work full-time and spent all her free time searching for her son, just like the other adult children in the family. This significantly affected the financial situation of the Lavis, which was already modest. Jamie's older sister, who was 15 at the time, dropped out of school to look after the family's three youngest children, cook, and clean the house. The family's efforts were rewarded. They managed to find out that on the day of Jamie's disappearance, he was seen boarding city bus number 219. He was traveling from the city center towards a neighboring suburb called Ashton-under-Lyne. This sounded plausible, as Jamie loved buses and even dreamed of becoming a driver. Now it was time to find out what happened to Jamie afterward. Having learned about route number 219, Jamie's 15-year-old sister, who was also participating in the search with the rest of the family, went to the bus station to talk to several drivers at once. That's how she met a man named Darren Vickers. He admitted that on May 5th, he was driving that same bus, number 219, and saw a boy who, according to the description, looked very similar to Jamie. He was dressed in a dark blue tracksuit and boarded the bus at about 10:30 a.m. The time and description matched, and the information about his clothes had not been openly distributed, so she believed Darren. However, there were some oddities. Darren said that the boy introduced himself as Dale, and it was unclear why the child hid his real name. According to the driver, Jamie rode the bus all day because he had an unlimited travel pass that allowed him to make an unlimited number of trips throughout the city. The boy sat in the front part behind the driver, mostly silently looking out the window, sometimes chatting with the driver and some of the other passengers. According to Darren, at the final station, Ashton-under-Lyne, Jamie got on another bus that was going back to the city center. Then Darren saw him again. After making several trips back and forth, Jamie again found himself on Darren's bus. Darren asked him why he had been doing this all day and not going home. Jamie replied that he had nothing to do on his day off and had an unlimited travel pass, so he just decided to ride. Darren didn't see a problem with his desire and did not kick him off the bus. Several regular passengers on the route also confirmed that they had seen Jamie on the bus that day. After speaking with Jamie's sister, Darren Vickers said he would call the police to pass on this information. He later visited Jamie's parents at their home to tell them all this in person. He seemed very concerned, wanted to help in the search for Jamie and participated in disseminating information. During the entire search and rescue operation, the police station received about 300 statements from various residents of the city. All these requests were checked, but only 3 of them turned out to be true. At the same time, none of the sightings of Jamie occurred after Monday, May 5th, which confirmed the worst fears of the authorities. By mid-June, More than a month had passed since Jamie's disappearance. By this time, the police were able to obtain recordings from CCTV cameras located on some streets of the city, particularly at key points on bus route 219. This allowed them to partially confirm Darren Vickers' statements. On May 5th, Jamie wandered around the Ashton-under-Lyne bus station. He then boarded another bus at a different terminus. He made several trips back and forth. He was last seen on tape boarding the 219 bus heading towards Manchester. Grainy footage of Jamie was shown to the public. It was expected that witnesses would come forward who might provide clues about Jamie's subsequent movements. Jamie's disappearance shook the public. The police were sure that they were not dealing with a kidnapping or disappearance but with murder, because too much time had passed to consider Jamie alive. Only his parents still retained hope for their son's safe return home. Karen and John continued to speak at press conferences in the hope of reaching more potential witnesses. During this time, they continued to go out every day and night to search and comb new areas of the city as well as the territory outside of it. Unfortunately, they were still unable to find any trace of their son. Almost 2 months passed, and on Tuesday, June 24, 1997, an anonymous report was received at the police station from an unknown man. A witness reported that the boy was buried in a shallow grave in a 190-acre wetland a few miles from his home. On June 27, more than 100 police officers, along with dogs and divers, began combing the area. They moved in lines, probed the ground, examined the dense underbrush, and used thermal imaging equipment in the hope of finding at least some human remains. The search continued until Monday but yielded no results. During this period, the only suspect the police had was the driver of bus 219, Darren Vickers. After Jamie's disappearance, he became unusually close to the Lavis family. As soon as the sister of Jamie spoke to him, he personally approached them with an offer to help. John and Karen readily accepted his offer. They were desperate to do anything to find their son and welcomed the help of Darren. However, the police found his behavior suspicious. Darren Vickers was 27 years old. He was married and had 4 children, but even his family noticed his excessive passion for searching for Jamie. He began to spend most of his time searching and paid almost no attention to his household. He did not just comb the streets with other volunteers and Jamie's family, he even lent Jamie's mother and father his car so they could inspect areas far from home. By doing this, they were able to explore territories up to 20 kilometers away. When the parents of Jamie first heard that their son was most likely dead, they were so devastated that they could not participate in press conferences. Darren supported them, assured them that Jamie was alive and would return soon. He even took their place at the press conference, addressing the public in newspapers and on television while holding a photo of Jamie to begging for help. He became so close to the Lavis family that Jamie's parents described him as a member of the family and the strongest support in their search. From the outside, it all looked very strange. In the first days of the investigation, Darren was the prime suspect. He was arrested, interrogated, and held at the station for a total of 24 hours, but no evidence of his guilt could be found. The Lavis family was very happy when they learned that Darren was being released. John and Karen was sure that such a sympathetic person could not have been involved in the disappearance of their son and criticized the police while he was in custody for interrogation. However, law enforcement officers were not ready to write him off. A warrant was obtained to search Darren's car. Nothing was found in his house, but a bloodstain was discovered on the back seat of the car. DNA samples were collected in the same manner as from the Lavis family, but it was later found that this blood was associated with an accidental nosebleed in one of Darren's children. However, the close scrutiny from the police caused him great harm. The searches became a serious emotional test for him. He took sick leave, could not work, and eventually quit altogether. His relationship with his wife significantly worsened, and they separated. After his wife kicked Darren out of the house, Jamie's parents willingly took him in. They treated him with such respect that they allowed him to occupy the marital bedroom while they slept on the couch in the living room. Darren brought them food, looked after the children, and helped them with everything. They became so close during this period. After, Darren responded directly to several print publications and on television. He insisted that it was only thanks to his statements about Jamie that the police had any leads in their search. Despite the active support of the Lavis family, detectives had serious concerns about Darren, and none of them were accidental. When the main suspect first met the sister of Jamie, he promised to go to the police station but never did. Law enforcement officers themselves visited him only a week later when they learned about him from other witnesses. These same people also reported other disturbing information that contradicted Darren's story. While he claimed that Jamie sat on the bus the entire time and looked out the window, the passengers saw how Jamie actually acted as the driver's trusted person, running around the cabin, handing over payments and tickets for travel. Jamie sat in Darren's arms, while Darren stroked the boy's head and even gave him money for soda. The two behaved like very close individuals, so much so that some passengers thought Jamie and Darren were father and son. Furthermore, Darren initially claimed that Jamie had an unlimited travel pass, but the police knew that only adults could obtain such a pass. Even more disturbing were the recordings from the CCTV cameras. The footage taken at the bus stop captured not just one Jamie waiting for the bus. In fact, Darren approached him and ruffled Jamie's hair before getting on his bus, after which Jamie immediately followed him. Darren did not disclose this information to the detective, which made his concealment look more than suspicious. Another crucial fact that Darren hid was that Jamie not only rode between the final stops several times but was also on the bus for 6 hours until the very end of his shift. All these stories were confirmed only during lengthy interrogations. According to Darren, in the evening, he offered Jamie a ride home, but Jamie said that he did not want to go home because his parents could punish him. Thus, Darren dropped him off at his grandmother's house a few blocks from the Lavis and then drove home. Darren insisted that he lied because he was under suspicion and had no idea what happened to Jamie next. Detectives believed he was lying again. It was revealed that Darren was an officially convicted child molester. It was believed that on May 5, 1997, Jamie attracted the attention of child abuse Darren when he boarded the bus alone. Jamie loved this mode of transportation, making it easy for Darren to deceive him and gain his trust. Additionally, Jamie was upset with his family, was in no hurry to return home, and even thought about running away, which made him an ideal target for an attack. After the end of his work shift, Jamie was kidnapped by the driver. It was presumed that he was subsequently abused and murdered. Naturally, Darren denied everything. Instead of going to the police as he had promised, he went straight to Jamie's family and positioned himself as an indispensable assistant to John and Karen. It was believed that in doing so, he manipulated the family into staying informed about the investigation's progress and avoiding suspicion. This fixated interest in Jamie and his family became so consuming. Throughout the search operations, the police station continued to receive reports of places where Jamie had been seen. Very often, when detectives arrived at such calls, Darren and Karen were already there. It seemed strange how they managed to arrive at calls faster than the police. Later, detectives discovered that Darren had bought a police scanner and was constantly listening to law enforcement broadcasts. His active participation was a way to convince the Lavis family and investigators that he was not involved in Jamie's disappearance and death. Finally, by September 1997, 4 months after the disappearance, detectives completely shifted their attention to Darren. 3 of the man's closest friends, as well as his mother, sister, and ex-wife, were also detained. All were interrogated under the assumption that they could be involved in Jamie's disappearance. However, a few days after the interrogations, everyone was released because the suspicion of their complicity could not be confirmed. Since Jamie Lavis' disappearance on May 5, 1997, searches have been relentless across Openshaw and the surrounding areas of Manchester. Greater Manchester Police, working with local volunteers, regularly combed narrow streets, abandoned buildings, and vacant lots where Jamie might have been hiding or in danger. Patrols periodically checked the banks of the River Medlock and public areas such as parks, while appeals were made in the local media to encourage residents to come forward with clues. The Lavis family, along with many neighbors, joined search parties, hung posters, and went door to door asking questions, holding out hope that Jamie was simply hiding somewhere. These efforts, while not immediately successful, maintained public interest and strengthened the resolve to find the boy until new leads emerged in the autumn. Around the same time, several teenagers approached detectives with new disturbing information. They said that a stranger had caught them on the street and taken them to Reddish Vale Park, near Manchester. He had attracted their attention by showing them a photograph of Jamie Lavis. He claimed to be a law enforcement officer and began luring the teenagers into the thicket under the pretext of identifying Jamie's body, saying he believed he had found Jamie. The teenagers saw nothing and did not believe the stranger from the start. He continued to lead them into the open area until they were too scared and ran away. They did not contact the police immediately because they could not identify the man. But a few days later, they were watching TV and recognized a bus driver named Darren Vickers, who continued to participate in press conferences. The teenagers identified him as the man who had tried to lead them into the forest. The police needed at least some pretext to arrest him. After checking, they managed to find several serious traffic violations, as well as forged documents, which provided grounds for detention for up to 3 months. After receiving the teenager's statement, enough circumstantial evidence accumulated to bring charges. Therefore, in mid-October, Darren Vickers was arrested for the second time. A thorough search of the Reddish Vale Park area was organized. With the help of those same teenagers who contacted the police, the route that Darren had led them was traced. They indicated a particularly overgrown area with a large number of trees and very tall, dense bushes that were difficult to navigate. In a remote part of the area, a dark blue tracksuit was found under a tarpaulin, matching the description of the clothes Jamie was wearing on the day of his disappearance. When forensic experts examined the items found, a lower part of the jawbone fell out of the jacket. Law enforcement officers then returned to the area, where more bones were found scattered over a large area around the place where the clothes had been discovered. The skull and limbs were never found, but thanks to DNA analysis and dental records matching the lower jaw, it was possible to identify the remains. The bones belonged to the missing 8-year-old Jamie Lavis. By that time, the remains had almost completely decomposed. Only a part of the bones remained, which showed traces of having been dragged away and gnawed by wild animals. Considering their poor condition and the fact that not all parts were found, it was not possible to establish the exact cause of Jamie's death. The fact that the body was found without clothes probably indicates that the victim was abused before his death. Police speculated that after the murder, Darren had dismembered his victim and scattered the remains over a large area to avoid detection. It was assumed that Darren repeatedly visited this area because he liked to relive the crime in his mind. When Jamie's mother and father were informed that their child had been found and that Darren was the killer, they refused to believe it. Despite the fact that Karen identified the clothing and dental records, it took months for them to accept the harsh reality. The detectives seriously believed that in fact, Darren Vickers had not only gotten close to the family to protect himself from authorities, but he was also prepared to strike again, likely targeting Jamie's brother, in order to kidnap and abuse him. He paid special attention to Jamie's brother when he was in the Lavis house during the search. Darren bought expensive gifts for Jamie's brother, including a bicycle and sneakers. Jamie's brother himself told investigators that Darren had repeatedly taken him on the bus during the search for Jamie before his dismissal. Once, Darren even took him to that same Reddish Vale Park and led him to the place where Jamie's body was later found. Jamie's brother was likely on the verge of death at that moment. As soon as all these facts were revealed, Darren Vickers was accused of killing Jamie Lavis. While in prison, he wrote a 15-page statement confessing to the crime. According to him, when he was driving Jamie home, he accidentally swerved the bus and hit the curb. Jamie fell and hit his head multiple times, after which he did not regain consciousness. Darren decided he had attempted to hide the body, eventually discarding it in the park. He labeled the incident as an accident and denied any intention of murder. However, they did not believe him. After all, if it had been an accident, why didn't he just go to the police? Why was it necessary to dismember Jamie's body? A man with a dark past related to violence against children was clearly trying to hide something in this way. Later, Darren retracted his confession and claimed that he was not involved in Jamie's death. The trial was scheduled for March of 1999. Darren attributed his confession to pressure from the authorities. A new version was presented before the jury, where Darren accused Jamie's father of murder, insisting that John was prone to violence. Furthermore, during the trial, Darren began to claim that he had repeatedly had intimate relations with Jamie's mother and even insisted that her baby was his and not John's. She denied this. A DNA test was conducted which confirmed that the father of the child was John, not Darren. However, journalists eagerly picked up on these statements and spread the information, undermining the trust of the Lavis family. Local residents became wary of their family. This was Darren's biggest blow to the family that had trusted him. The lie provoked the emergence of new unpleasant rumors suggesting that Karen had slept with her son's killer and was possibly involved in the crime. Jamie's father also tried to refute the lie, stating that he had never been cruel to his children and could not have killed his son. In any case, all this caused great damage to the Lavis family, adding to their emotional traumas. After a 2-day deliberation, Darren Vickers was found guilty of murdering Jamie Lavis. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and also received 4 additional years for kidnapping. At the same time, the court retained the right for Darren to apply for parole after 25 years in prison. Until the end of the trial, Darren did not admit his guilt. However, less than 24 hours after the sentencing began, he requested to speak with the lead investigator in the case. The detective arrived in his cell. Here, through tears, he confessed to kidnapping Jamie and abusing Jamie on the bus. Darren acknowledged that he had slandered Jamie's mother and father. Now he expressed regret, apologized to the family, and wanted them to find peace after his confession. Darren then attempted to appeal his sentence twice, but both times were unsuccessful. His first attempt for conditional early release occurred in February 2023 when he was 56 years old. However, the commission decided that he would always pose a danger to children, so they recommended against releasing him. Nevertheless, Darren will have many more attempts. Whether the authorities will be able to keep such a dangerous criminal behind bars forever is unknown. The Jamie Lavis case is a heartbreaking tragedy that has not only claimed the life of an 8-year-old boy, but has left a deep wound in the Lavis family and the Openshaw community. Darren Vickers' manipulative and cruel actions have destroyed trust and exploited the kindness of a family desperate to find their son. Although justice has been served with a life sentence, the trauma Jamie's family has endured will never be erased. This story serves as a warning of the dangers lurking within society and highlights the importance of vigilance and the ongoing effort to protect the most vulnerable. Hopefully, in time, the Lavis family will find some peace amid their irreparable loss. Donatella Colasanti was born on May 12, 1958, and grew up in a working-class family in Rome, Italy. She had a childhood friend named Rosaria Lopez, who was born in 1956. They lived in the same neighborhood and had similar financial backgrounds, which fostered a strong bond between them. By 1975, Rosaria was 19 and was working as a bartender to support her dream of attending college and becoming independent from her parents. She struggled to balance work and school, but she was determined to succeed. At that time, Donatella was 17 years old and still looking for a full-time job. They spent a lot of time together and had mutual friends, including John Pietro Parboni. On September 28, 1975, John invited them to a bar to relax and meet his friends. There, they met 2 other friends of John's, Angelo Izzo, who was 20, and Giovanni Guido, who was 19. The group enjoyed the evening, and the girls were attracted to the young men. The guys mentioned another mutual friend who couldn't make it to the gathering but suggested that Rosaria and Donatella meet him at another event planned for the following day, September 29th, at John's house. Angelo and Giovanni appeared to be nice, and both Rosaria and Donatella consented to attend the celebration. They arranged to meet Angelo and Giovanni near the Ambassador Cinema at 3:30 p.m. However, John did not join them. Angelo and Giovanni explained that John's plans had changed and that he was waiting for them at his home. Trusting them, the girls decided to go along, unaware that Giovanni took a different route, which they did not immediately notice since they were unfamiliar with the area. At around 6 to 8 p.m., they arrived at a villa named Moresca, located on the coast of Curcio in the Punta Rosa area, about 100 kilometers south of Rome. The villa belonged to their friend Andrea Gaira, who was 22 at the time. Angelo and Giovanni encouraged Rosaria and Donatella to meet their mutual friend Andrea, who owned the villa but had been unable to join them at the bar the previous day. They convinced the girls that John was swimming in the sea and would return shortly. The boys were polite and charming, which made the girls trust them. It's important to mention that all the young people came from respectable families. They also used pseudonyms, which the girls only understood much later when they found themselves in trouble. Giovanni, born on January 10, 1956, was the son of a wealthy official. At the time of this incident, he was studying architecture at a local university and living with his parents. Angelo Izzo, born on August 23, 1955, came from a middle-class family in Rome. At 13, he became involved in a social movement with extreme right-wing views and was known for his cruelty and aggression. The community feared him because he was extremely volatile. At the end of 1969, he and a friend named Andrea Gaira were expelled from their group for attempting to use the group's house to hide stolen mopeds. This incident was not the first to pose a threat to the organization. In the following years, he became increasingly ruthless, and his list of criminal activities grew significantly. He frequently led attacks on the Italian Socialist Party alongside other supporters from Rome. Additionally, he distributed illegal banned substances that he personally consumed and planned and carried out robberies of banks, jewelry stores, and post offices. The most horrifying fact for Donatella and Rosaria was that Angelo was involved in the gang abuse of multiple young girls. His method was consistent. He would meet the girls through mutual friends and lure them to a house where they were violently assaulted. In 1975, Angelo began studying medicine, but he was drawn to the criminal underworld rather than focusing on his studies. He frequently skipped school to attend parties and bars, hung out with the wrong crowd, and incited fights with rival gangs. His preferred party venues were events organized by extreme right-wing activists that featured excessive drinking, the use of banned substances, and a culture that often included the abuse and mistreatment of women. To keep the girls unaware of the danger they were in, Angelo and his friends used fake names. By 1974, Angelo had already abused 2 women with accomplices. Although he was arrested and tried, he only received a 2-year prison sentence. It was widely believed that his father's wealth and connections helped him secure such a light punishment. This sense of invincibility only made him more brutal, as he felt there were no real consequences for his actions. Andrea Gaira, born on September 21, 1953, has had a life full of ups and downs. His father, Aldo Gaira, was a wealthy construction contractor who owned a plant that produced electrical equipment. A former professional water polo player, Aldo won many medals with the Italian national team. In contrast, Andrea was more drawn to far-right political movements than to athletics or his father's profession. He became involved with these ideologies while still in high school, eventually organizing a group focused on criminal activities, which he viewed as a way to exert social influence and advance his political agenda. Starting at the age of 16, he faced serious legal troubles, including multiple incidents of hooliganism. This marked the beginning of his criminal career, heavily influenced by the notorious Marseille gang, from which he adopted the alias Jacques, after one of the gang's leaders. Jacques was known for carrying out kidnappings in Rome for the purpose of extortion. Using this pseudonym, Andrea introduced himself to new acquaintances. He was formally charged with hooliganism, and by 1972, he faced additional prosecution for armed assault causing serious injury. A year later, he and his friend Angelo committed an armed robbery, for which they were caught and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Money, connections, and a lenient justice system contributed to the troubling incident that unfolded. After only 2 years, both Angelo and Andrea were released. Rosaria and Donatella did not realize how truly dangerous they were. Despite their friendly interactions and pleasant appearances, they lured Rosaria and Donatella to a party with malicious intent. Initially, the party at the villa seemed harmless. Everyone was chatting, listening to music, and drinking. However, As Angelo and Giovanni drank heavily and used banned substances, they became erratic and aggressive. Initially, Rosaria and Donatella considered the boys' annoying flirtations to be just a joke. However, as the situation became more serious, they realized they were being threatened and had no way out. They firmly denied having any intimate relations with the men and asked to go home. Then one of the criminals pulled a gun on them, introduced himself as a member of a criminal gang in Marseille, and stated that the leader of the gang had ordered their kidnapping. At this point, Rosaria and Donatella's spirits were broken, and the real nightmare began. They were subjected to torture and multiple abuses by Giovanni and Angelo. They were beaten and tormented at gunpoint, with the owner of the villa, Andrea, joining in on the violence. This horrifying situation continued for approximately 36 hours. Rosaria and Donatella were administered a banned substance, and Rosaria was taken to the upstairs bathroom, where she endured another brutal beating. After that, they began to drown her until she lost consciousness. They attacked Donatella several times, rendering her unconscious but failing to kill her. Instead, they mocked her. When Rosaria died, the criminals clearly intended to eliminate her as well. However, they eventually lost interest, became distracted, and left her unconscious in the living room. Once she was conscious again, she quickly decided to take the opportunity to call for help. She started dialing the emergency number, but just as she heard the beeping through the receiver, one of the criminals entered the room. Before she could say anything, she was struck on the head with a heavy object, an iron kettle. She collapsed, bleeding and displaying no further signs of life. The criminals then decided to dispose of the bodies. They wrapped Rosaria and Donatella in towels and blankets, placed them in bags, and transported them to a white Fiat parked outside the villa. They stuffed the bodies into the trunk and then got into the car, driving toward Rome. It was evident that they felt no remorse as they laughed and joked about having 2 dead bodies in the car during the drive. The group finally reached Giovanni's house in the city. Feeling hungry, they chose to stop for dinner at a restaurant before dealing with the bodies. They left the car parked on the street and, upon entering the restaurant, encountered 2 other men associated with a different group. A fight erupted, instigated by the criminals, who acted as if nothing was amiss despite having 2 bodies in the trunk. Little did they know that Donatella was alive all along. After being struck on the head, she pretended to be dead to avoid further harm, and it worked. Once she realized the criminals had left the car, she waited a while to ensure they were gone. Then, she began to scream and thrash about in the trunk. Despite her injuries and intense pain, she summoned her last ounce of strength to fight for her life. It was around 11 p.m., and the streets were mostly empty. The likelihood of anyone hearing her cries for help was slim, but fortunately, a nearby security guard noticed noise coming from the trunk of a car. An elderly bystander, who saw blood dripping from the vehicle, quickly approached a police car parked nearby. This timely intervention proved to be crucial for Donatella, as the young assailants were preparing to leave. The police communicated via radio to report the situation. At that moment, a journalist interested in the case rushed to the scene. The journalist arrived just as law enforcement was trying to open the trunk, from which screams could still be heard. Once the trunk was finally opened, they discovered a bloody, beaten young woman. She was naked and badly injured, lying beside the body of her deceased friend, Rosaria. Medical assessments later revealed that Donatella had sustained multiple serious injuries, including a severe head injury from a blow with a metal rod and a broken nose. The trauma she suffered in the trunk of the car, being with her dead friend, left her with deep psychological scars. Donatella struggled for a long time to cope with the aftermath but could never fully heal. During her time in the hospital, she lived in constant fear that the criminals would return to eliminate her as a witness. Sleep eluded her, and even after being discharged, her fear of retaliation from the attackers lingered. Meanwhile, Giovanni, noticing a crowd gathering around his car, attempted to flee but was caught. Angelo was also apprehended, while Andrea received a warning and managed to escape. He was placed on the wanted list. The next day, the police located Andrea's relatives, who were washing blood from their home, indicating that they were trying to cover for her. They provided no information to the police, leading to speculation that he had warned them about the situation and sought their help to hide. Unfortunately, their cover-up was effective, they prolonged the time, and the traces were erased. Angelo and Giovanni were arrested and questioned about the attack on Rosaria and Donatella, but they continually denied any wrongdoing. After several months, Andrea was still at large, and all attempts to find him had been unsuccessful. Suddenly, his friends received a letter from him in which he claimed that, thanks to their good behavior, they would soon be released because he had made an agreement with the mafia. He also threatened that Donatella would die if she decided to testify against them in court. This increased pressure on Donatella, but she refused to be silenced. She was determined to avenge Rosaria's death and her own suffering. Donatella miraculously escaped and realized that until the criminals were caught, she wouldn't be able to live in peace, fearing their return. Inspired by Donatella's testimony, the Carabinieri managed to piece together the incident of the crime, which had been carried out by a group of young people in the countryside. However, Donatella's lawyer is concerned that criminals may evade punishment due to the influence of their parents. To ensure maximum visibility for the case, a group of volunteers was formed, led by Donatella's lawyer, to support the fight against the criminals. Several feminist organizations attended the trial to show their support. Thanks to their efforts and Donatella's bravery, on July 29th, all three accused were convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Angelo, Izzo, and Giovanni received life sentences without the possibility of parole, while Andrea Guerra remained at large. For a long time, Andrea was not caught, making Donatella's fear grow. She was terrified of his possible return and the revenge he might seek, since he was still at large. The police were desperate to find him but were unsuccessful. Years passed, during which Donatella lived in constant fear and tried to influence law enforcement efforts. The Carabinieri discovered that Andrea had fled to Spain shortly after the murder on June 26, 1976. He joined the Spanish Legion under a fake name, Massimo Testa de Andres, claiming to have been born in Rome in 1955 and even presented counterfeit documents. While serving, Andrea frequently changed bases and became heavily involved in the use and distribution of banned substances, leading to a serious addiction. The effects of his banned substance use became increasingly apparent. On May 28, 1980, he was imprisoned for 6 months for offenses related to banned substances. In 1982, he was assigned to the Special Forces in Malaga and later transferred to Melilla, where he faced several repercussions for the use and possession of banned substances. On July 21, 1993, Andrea began experiencing health issues and was hospitalized, where doctors diagnosed him with a brain tumor. Due to his deteriorating mental health and various physical ailments, he was discharged into the reserves. Without a passport, Andrea moved to the city where he had been last stationed, living with his girlfriend, who owned a small shop. However, he quickly spent all the money he had earned during his service and continued to abuse banned substances. Tragically, he died from an overdose on September 2, 1994. His body was discovered a week later, on September 9th, after he had moved out from his girlfriend's place. In 2005, when the disturbing details of Andrea's life were uncovered, the Rome prosecutor's office requested the exhumation of his body. This request was approved on November 14th of that year. Andrea's remains were exhumed in the presence of local investigators, and his femur was sent to Rome for analysis. On November 26th, a DNA test confirmed his identity, but the results were questionable because the test had been conducted by a former student who was a relative of Andrea's mother. This led Donatella to believe that the bone might belong to one of Andrea's relatives and that Andrea himself could still be alive, potentially committing more crimes in Rome or elsewhere. Despite the attempts to explain the situation to her, she remained traumatized and wanted to ensure her safety. To clarify any doubts, in January 2016, the Rome prosecutor's office reopened the investigation and exhumed the body again to perform a more thorough DNA test using advanced techniques from a different laboratory. In June 2016, the results confirmed the earlier analysis of the femur, proving that Andrea had indeed died and no longer posed a threat to her. Angelo and Giovanni led tumultuous lives. In January 1977, while serving prison sentences, they attempted to escape by taking a prison guard hostage. Fortunately, their escape plan was unsuccessful. In January 1986, Angelo made another escape attempt from a different correctional facility. Despite these violations, on August 25, 1993, he benefited from a reduction in the severity of his detention, which allowed him a temporary leave from prison. Instead of returning, he fled to France but was captured in Paris on September 15 and extradited back to Italy. These incidents instilled intense fear in Donatella. She had survived an earlier attack but remained haunted by the possibility of being harmed again. In December 2004, Angelo Izzo was granted partial freedom from Campobasso prison to work at the Città Futura cooperative, but he still did not change his way of life. Just 5 months later, on April 28, 2005, he murdered 14-year-old Valentina Majorano and her mother, 50-year-old Maria Carmela. They are the wife and daughter of his former cellmate, Giovanni Majorano. He attacked the mother first and then turned to her daughter. Like 30 years earlier, Angelo disposed of their bodies by packing them in bags, but this time he learned from past mistakes and buried the victims immediately, preventing any chance of their bodies being discovered. On April 30th, the crime was resolved after an accomplice, Luca Palaia, confessed. As a result, the main perpetrator, Angelo, received only a 3-year prison sentence. Investigators initially believed the crime was motivated by abuse since Valentina was found naked. However, Angelo claimed that his motive was robbery, stating that he attacked Maria after she refused to give him her valuables and subsequently eliminated Valentina as a witness. Later, detectives speculated that the attack on Maria and Valentina was motivated by revenge against Angelo's former cellmate, Luca, who was associated with a rival group. On January 12, 2007, Angelo was sentenced to life imprisonment for the double murder. The families of Maria and Valentina felt the justice system was at fault for allowing such a dangerous individual to roam free, as Angelo was clearly unrehabilitated. They argued that the tragic deaths of Maria and Valentina could have been avoided if he had remained in prison. The families later appealed to the European Court of Human Rights. On December 15, 2009, the court found Italy guilty of violating Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights by allowing Angelo, a life-sentenced prisoner, to have semi-freedom. The Strasbourg court determined that this decision directly led to the deaths of Maria Carmela and Valentina Majorano, who were killed by Angelo while he was at large. The judge emphasized that the state has a duty to protect the right to life, which includes taking necessary precautions to safeguard individuals in its care. The court concluded that granting semi-freedom to such a dangerous criminal, along with a lack of supervision, directly contributed to the deaths. As a result, the Italian authorities were obligated to compensate their families with 45,000 euros for moral damages. Despite his violent actions, some individuals romanticized Angelo's image. For instance, in November 2009, a journalist who had closely followed his criminal activities expressed a desire to marry him and advocated for his release. She believed in his innocence and was committed to proving it. In March 2010, they formed a relationship while he was in prison, but it ended about a year later. In an attempt to have his sentence reduced, Angelo testified before a commission combating the mafia, claiming to know about a girl named Rossella Carrazin who disappeared at age 17 on August 21, 1975. He alleged that she had captured the attention of a Masonic lodge due to her innocence and charm and was used as a sacrifice in initiation ceremonies of the Red Rose Cross Brotherhood. He stated that he last saw her after a Masonic ritual when she was released from the hall. Angelo was convinced her body could be found in the forest, but searches yielded nothing, and no one believed his claims. While in prison, Giovanni Guido wrote several manuscripts, including a book titled Decameron 1975. This book resembles the tragic incident involving 3 criminals and 2 girls, Donatella and Rosaria, one of whom did not survive the attack. On October 28, 1980, Giovanni's prison sentence was reduced to 30 years following a successful appeal. This reduction was granted after he expressed remorse and paid 100 million lire in compensation to Rosaria and Donatella's families. In January 1981, Giovanni escaped from prison and fled to Buenos Aires but was quickly recognized. Almost 2 years later, he was captured and awaited extradition. However, due to hepatitis contracted during his previous imprisonment, he was placed in a medical facility. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he escaped from the hospital on April 17, 1985, before his extradition could take place. He was discovered again in Panama in the summer of 1994, where he started a new life as a used car salesman. When authorities found him, he was extradited back to Italy. Surprisingly, on April 11, 2008, his sentence was changed to community service after he had served 14 years in prison. During his time behind bars, he earned a degree in foreign languages and literature. His sentence officially ended on August 25, 2009, following a pardon. This significant reduction in his sentence sparked outrage, especially from Rosaria Lopez's sister, who felt that the punishment for the brutal killer was not strict enough. She believed that the years Giovanni spent abroad after his escape were overlooked in the decision-making process. Despite objections, requests to reconsider the pardon were denied. The villa where the crime occurred is now unoccupied. 25 years later, Andrea's mother sold it to an elderly woman. The villa then passed to her son, who attempted to convert it, which was known as a house of horrors, into a studio but ultimately abandoned the project. The villa now stands neglected, with rusted gates and overgrown vegetation nearly engulfing the area where 17-year-old Donatella was released. A memorial plaque and red benches symbolizing the fight against gender violence were placed there during that time. Amidst these changes, the story of survivor Donatella Colasanti remains heart-wrenching. Despite being a minor, she miraculously survived the assault by 3 attackers but lived in fear for the rest of her life. Nevertheless, she continued to fight for justice and passed away from breast cancer on December 30, 2005, at the age of 47. Her last message was a call to action: let's fight for the truth. In 2020, her former home was restored and transformed into a center dedicated to combating violence in Rome. In early June 2014, road maintenance crews were cutting grass along a highway in Walworth County. It was a routine job until a worker noticed 2 suitcases, one purple and one black, abandoned in the bushes on the side of the road. Immediately suspicious, they were further disturbed by a strong odor and a swarm of flies surrounding the suitcases. A police officer was called to the scene. Upon his arrival, he opened the purple suitcase and made a grisly discovery: the body of a woman inside a black trash bag. The black suitcase also contained the body of another woman. One of the women was in an advanced state of decomposition, with her hands tied behind her back with rope. The other woman was naked and had a rope necklace around her neck. Both had clearly been dead for a long time. The area was quickly sealed off, and a thorough investigation began. A bulletin was issued across the Midwest revealing that 2 unidentified female victims had been discovered. This announcement sparked a surge of missing persons reports from various departments in the region. Authorities faced the daunting task of sorting through numerous names and details in hopes of identifying the victims. Investigators scrutinized the ropes that bound the women, seeking any trace evidence or DNA that could lead to the perpetrator. Within a day, they successfully identified one victim by her distinctive tattoos: Laura Simonson, a 37-year-old mother from Farmington, Minnesota, who had been reported missing on November 22, 2013. The police tracked Laura's last known movements to the Microtel Inn and Suites in Rochester, Minnesota. Hotel staff confirmed she stayed there on November 2nd and 3rd. Security footage showed that she was accompanied by a man who checked in with her, paid in cash, and refused to provide his real name. The following day, he was seen leaving alone, pushing a trolley full of bags. Laura has not been seen since. As of mid-January 2014, a tip identified a man named Stephen Zielik as a person who might have been with Laura. The detective assigned to the case contacted the West Allis police to investigate Stephen's home, but they found no evidence of Laura. Weeks later, after Stephen did not respond to a letter, the FBI and the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation visited his residence. He admitted that he was in Rochester with Laura but claimed they had broken up afterwards. He denied having any romantic relationship with her and insisted that he had not seen her since. In April 2014, just weeks before Laura's body was discovered, a concerning post appeared on a classified advertisement website. It accused Stephen of being an abuser who had imprisoned a woman named Laura Simonson. The post claimed she was held naked, shackled, and abused, urging people to harass Stephen to pressure him for her release. The post included his phone number and email, as well as a link to an illegal website where he allegedly used the username Randcuffs. At the time, the author of the post remained unknown, but it became terrifyingly haunting when Laura's remains were found. The situation worsened as investigators needed to identify a second victim known only as Jane Doe. She was estimated to be between 15 and 35 years old, weighing about 120 to 140 pounds. She had an overbite, 2 piercings in each ear, and a small heart tattoo on her lower left pelvis. To aid in her identification, a forensic sketch was released. The sketch eventually reached the friends and family of Jenny Gomez in Oregon, who believed it resembled her. Dental records from a foster parent confirmed her identity. Jenny was 19 years old and a student from Cottage Grove, Oregon. Her friends described her as cheerful and full of life. She had a young son but had lost custody. Jenny had a challenging upbringing, spending time in multiple foster homes. She graduated from an alternative high school with honors and earned a college scholarship. Those who knew her remembered her as resilient and optimistic. However, her family and friends did not report her missing, as they believed she was simply getting on with her life. Now, detectives need to determine the cause of Jenny's death and find out who was responsible. They discovered that both Laura and Jenny had joined the same illegal website and had communicated with the same man, Stephen Zelick. Laura had once messaged him, saying that if he ever killed her, no one would find her. Investigators traced his email to an apartment in West Allis, where they monitored him and tracked his vehicle. When he came home from work, the police were waiting. He claimed he had never met Laura in person but agreed to provide a DNA sample. Stephen admitted to having had an interest in illegal websites since he was 19, insisting it had been a part of his life for years. However, the investigators suspected something more. His online identity, connections with both Laura and Jenny, along with emerging physical evidence, painted a much more sinister picture. In a dark corner of the internet, Stephen has a very disturbing profile. His online presence is clear. He is looking for a permanent slave, someone who is willing to give up all their autonomy. He outlined his vision of a submissive as someone who should be restrained with ropes, hooded, caged, or led by a collar and leash, with limits on their freedom. For him, this is more than a hobby, it is a lifestyle, and he is determined to find someone to share it with. Stephen believed he had effectively erased his digital footprint, but despite his efforts, evidence still existed. His computer had software designed to wipe data continuously, and it logged numerous deletions. Yet authorities were able to access Laura's laptop, which contained copies of their online conversations. More damaging was the hotel surveillance footage that showed Stephen checking in with Laura, providing clear proof of their meeting. However, circumstantial evidence alone couldn't guarantee a conviction. Detectives needed undeniable proof linking him to the 2 deceased women, Laura and Jenny. The turning point came when forensic analysis of the rope used to bind Jenny identified DNA that matched Stephen. This crucial evidence led the police to obtain a search warrant for his apartment in West Allis. What they discovered inside was alarming. The apartment was dirty, but they found cleaning supplies, bleach, and tools typically used to destroy evidence. Additionally, they uncovered one of the suitcases used to transport the bodies, as well as bondage gear and an authentic police badge. Stephen had previously served as a police officer. He worked with the West Allis Police Department from 1989 until his resignation in 2001, but his history was problematic. Internal affairs records showed alarming behaviors, including misusing his position, stalking women while on duty, and accessing confidential information for personal reasons. In total, he faced 10 disciplinary actions during his career, with accusations ranging from intimidation to the inappropriate use of sensitive police databases. A recorded conversation between Stephen and his police chief reveals a tense exchange about his behavior while on duty. The chief raised concerns about the appropriateness of his repeated interactions with women. Stephen defended himself, saying his actions were appropriate and described them as very normal. However, complaints from local businesses and individuals suggested otherwise. In May 2001, a dancer accused him of offering $300 for a private show. She agreed to go to his home, but once there, she claimed she heard the sound of handcuffs. Fearing what might happen next, she attempted to escape, but Stephen allegedly threw her to the ground and choked her. She eventually broke free and ran to a neighbor's house, shouting for help, fearing for her life. Stephen maintained that she was trying to rob him. A few months later, he resigned from the police force without facing any disciplinary action, allowing him to keep a clean record and later obtain a private security license. Jamie, a former roommate who had briefly dated Stephen before they became friends, later shared disturbing information. She discovered a large wire cage in his basement along with abuse equipment. She revealed that he had confided in her about keeping a woman imprisoned in that cage for 7 years while he was still working as a police officer. Concerned for her own safety and that of her children, Jamie waited until he left for work, then packed her belongings, rented a U-Haul, and left without looking back. In January, while Stephen was being questioned about Laura, he posted on another forum expressing his desire to find a master. He expressed a desire to be enslaved, caged, and reduced to an animal-like existence. He envisioned an ideal life of captivity, whether on a farm or in a prison cell. As bizarre as his online activity was, few could have predicted what would happen next. On June 25, shortly after 8 a.m., authorities from Walworth County arrived at his apartment complex in West Allis. Armed officers stormed the unit, using shields and a battering ram. Witnesses were shocked as officers rushed in and later emerged with evidence bags and Stephen's refrigerator. Now 52, Stephen was arrested on 2 counts of concealing a corpse. His seemingly quiet life as a security guard had been a facade. Despite working at a security company since 2007, his colleagues describe him as an oddball. On the very day Stephen disposed of the bodies, he was active online. The district attorney revealed that he had messaged a woman named Petra that same day, expressing a desire to keep her in complete captivity and indicating that he was ready to plan her dehumanization. As more evidence came to light, a clearer picture of Stephen emerged. Documents detailing his history spanned hundreds of pages, from his initial police department application in 1989 to his resignation letter in 2001. In the early years of his police career, Stephen was evaluated as professional, respectful, and reliable. However, as the late 1990s transitioned into the early 2000s, troubling behavior began to surface, accompanied by a growing number of complaints. Several women came forward, claiming that Stephen had harassed and followed them while on duty. Prosecutors alleged that his relationship with Jenny began when she was 16 and in the foster care system. They first connected on a bondage-themed website. Their communication stopped and then resumed after she turned 18. He persuaded her to move in with him in Wisconsin, urging her to erase her social media accounts and cut ties with her friends. In August 2012, Jenny took a one-way flight to Milwaukee, telling her family she was going to welding school. Stephen picked her up at the airport, and they checked into a hotel in Kenosha. He later told the police that they participated in breath play, a dangerous activity that involves restricting breathing. He claimed that during one session, he lost control and accidentally strangled her while she was tied up and blindfolded. Stephen's lawyer argued that after this incident, he panicked. He placed Jenny's body in a suitcase and brought it back to his apartment, where he stored it in his refrigerator. Jenny's remains stayed there for over a year. As the body decomposed, the refrigerator could no longer be closed, so he taped it shut. After his arrest, he confessed to being involved in Jenny's death, but police stated they still needed to determine whether it constituted homicide. Jenny, from Cottage Grove, Oregon, had told her family in late 2012 that she was moving to protect them, which is why they never filed a missing person report. Friends described her as kind-hearted and well-intentioned. However, when authorities questioned Stephen, he could not remember her name. Jenny's body remained in the refrigerator until Laura entered the picture. Like Jenny, Laura met Stephen online. They arranged to meet at the Microtel Inn and Suites in Rochester, Minnesota. Once again, Stephen encouraged her to delete her social media accounts, sell her car, and sever connections with others. According to his account, Laura also died during a breath control session. He claimed it was another accident. Laura was found naked, with a gag in her mouth and a collar around her neck. After Laura died, Stephen placed both women's bodies into suitcases, loaded them into his trunk, and drove to a remote area on a road in Geneva, Wisconsin, where he left them near a ditch. Stephen later admitted that he decided it was time to dispose of them. Strangely, the location where Stephen discarded the suitcases was close to the local police station. Prosecutors argued that this was not a coincidence, suggesting he chose that spot out of carelessness or arrogance. Despite the horrific nature of the situation, Stephen's defense team presented a different viewpoint. They contended that the deaths were accidental, not criminal, and claimed that by leaving the suitcases in the open, he was not attempting to hide anything. They argued that Stephen was simply trying to dispose of the bodies, not conceal them. Stephen faced 2 counts of hiding a corpse. His defense attorney requested a $50,000 bond, highlighting his college education and community connections, but the judge did not agree. Bail was set at $1 million, as the judge deemed it necessary for public safety and to prevent Stephen from fleeing. Currently, the accusations only pertain to the concealment of a body. However, as more evidence emerges, particularly the similarities between the deaths of the 2 women, Laura and Jenny, the situation may change. On Tuesday, August 5th, Stephen was officially charged with first-degree intentional homicide and concealing a corpse related to the death of Jenny. These charges marked a significant moment in a case already filled with distressing details. Since Laura died in Minnesota, her case was being processed there and was put on hold until the Wisconsin trial concluded. The Kenosha County District Attorney pointed out that Laura's death was crucial in revealing the truth about both murders. Stephen quickly became a suspect in her disappearance, especially after security footage showed him and Laura checking into a hotel together. These incidents were not mere accidents or misunderstandings. Laura's family described her as a vulnerable person who had battled mental health issues. Her father shared that she had been posting escort advertisements on Craigslist, and in 2010, her children were placed in his care. The family had already faced a devastating tragedy when Laura's 13-year-old twin daughters, who had disabilities, died in June 2013. Prosecutors planned to argue that the murders were premeditated. They declared that Stephen intentionally targeted isolated or vulnerable women, encouraging them to cut off relationships both on social media and in person, and then employed methods of killing that left little forensic evidence. An unexpected turn occurred when jury selection was about to start, as Stephen reached a plea agreement. In a surprising move, he pleaded guilty to killing 19-year-old Jenny Gomez. As a result of the plea deal, Stephen, then 54, faced a possible 75-year prison sentence, which the state intended to pursue to ensure he spent the rest of his life in prison. The original charge of first-degree intentional homicide was reduced, and he pleaded guilty to first-degree reckless homicide with a dangerous weapon, the rope used in Jenny's death, and to concealing her body. In total, he was sentenced to 35 years in prison, along with 10 years of supervised release. An additional 5 years were added concurrently for the charge of concealing a corpse. During sentencing, Stephen appeared emotionally detached. He did make a brief apology, describing Jenny as a good person, but the prosecution depicted him as a predator who intentionally targeted vulnerable women and abused their trust. The district attorney expressed satisfaction with the sentence, believing it would enhance public safety. Stephen's defense lawyer, Jonathan Smith, urged the judge to consider that Laura's death occurred later and should not influence Jenny's case, but the judge disagreed. Next came the trial for the murder of Laura Simonson. Now 55 years old, Stephen pleaded guilty to second-degree murder with intent in her death and received a 25-year prison sentence. Although the judge acknowledged Stephen's cooperation, she still believed that the sentence was reasonable. She stated that Stephen would have to serve enough time in prison to prevent other victims from suffering at his hands. Some of Laura's family members sought a harsher sentence. Her daughter described him as a monster and lamented that maybe while he rots in a cell, he would understand the pain he caused. Since the two sentences will be served consecutively, Stephen will spend the rest of his life in prison. The conclusion of this story is profoundly tragic. Both Laura and Jenny were mothers who faced unimaginable hardships and ultimately became victims of a man who exploited their vulnerabilities. Eddie Werner entered the world on December 25, 1985, born into a comfortable, upper-middle-class family. His father worked as a lawyer, and Eddie was the couple's firstborn child. During his early childhood, he was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder along with a mild form of Tourette's syndrome. Yet, despite these hurdles, Eddie maintained a deep passion for learning and eagerly awaited the end of each summer break so he could return to his classmates. He was known for his cheerful disposition and outgoing nature. When not at home or in school, Eddie could typically be found outdoors, socializing with neighborhood kids. His upbeat personality and easygoing charm made him well-liked among peers, and he was quickly seen as one of the more popular children in his elementary school. Within his family, he served as a model older brother to his younger siblings, Kelly, Tommy, and Lauren, offering support and kindness at every turn. Roughly 6 years before tragedy struck, the Werner family had relocated to Jackson Township in New Jersey. Located just an hour from New York City, the township was considered a peaceful, family-friendly suburb with a population of approximately 50,000 residents. Many viewed it as an ideal place to raise children. On the afternoon of Saturday, September 27, 1997, 11-year-old Eddie left home, not for play, but with a goal. He was participating in a school-organized fundraising initiative, which required students to sell candy door-to-door throughout the neighborhood. Such programs were common during the time and often came with enticing prizes. Eddie, highly motivated by the promise of a walkie-talkie for the top seller, took the task seriously. So much so, in fact, that he dressed up in an unusually formal outfit for the occasion: black shirt, black jeans, and matching sneakers. Although Eddie's parents harbored concern about him going out alone, they admired his drive and independence. They chose to respect his wishes, believing the experience would foster maturity and responsibility. He was expected to return by dinner time. When that hour passed without any sign of him, his parents grew increasingly alarmed. Their initial search of the surrounding neighborhood yielded no results, prompting them to alert the police. By 11 p.m. that night, a large-scale search had been launched. Authorities deployed a large force, including K-9 units, helicopters, and dozens of police officers. Local residents also joined in, forming search parties in an effort to assist. It is estimated that about 250 people participated in this search, but their efforts were in vain. The absence of any leads caused widespread concern, drawing intense public attention. Even the organization that hosted the school fundraiser spoke up, making a call to the community. They urged anyone who might have seen Eddie or knew of his whereabouts to come forward, as worry and fear gripped the town. Although a day had slipped by, the search for the missing child yielded no results. Whispers and rumors echoed between the doors. Families living near the Werner home began to exhibit visible unease. Streets that had once resonated with laughter and the rhythmic steps of carefree children now lay deserted. Even casual acts, like walking the family dog, were abruptly abandoned by anxious parents. Alongside the fear, criticism surfaced. It was the fundraising initiative that allowed children to go to strangers' homes on their own that led to the incident. The question is why such behavior is allowed to continue unchecked. It seems that the model has lost credibility. Faced with mounting pressure, the fund's organizers were compelled to issue explanations. New rules were quickly introduced. Children would now be required to work in pairs or trios, always under the watchful eye of an adult. 2 days after the boy's disappearance, on the evening of September 29, 1997, something unexpected happened. A police officer, off-duty and simply taking his dog for a walk through a wooded patch near a housing area, noticed something unusual. The terrain was familiar, often frequented by teenagers looking for privacy. But the heightened search efforts had recently cleared the area. The dog picked up a scent, Trusting the animal's instincts, the officer followed closely behind. What he encountered moments later would mark a tragic turning point in the investigation. Nestled beneath a tree, the half-naked, lifeless body of a young boy lay motionless. The scene was profoundly disturbing. The injuries were not subtle. The child had been viciously assaulted, with one of the most visible marks being a shoe print-like bruise imprinted across his back. Though there was evidence of blunt force trauma to the head, the medical examiner would later conclude that it had occurred post-mortem. The child had died from asphyxiation. Given the condition in which he was found, authorities strongly suspected abuse assault had occurred. That same day, locals came forward with flowers, candles, teddy bears, and heartfelt messages. Within hours, the ground had become a living memorial to the 11-year-old boy, now identified as Eddie Werner. News of the brutal crime spread rapidly. Local broadcasts ran continuous coverage, while journalists speculated on who could have committed such an atrocity. One detective from a neighboring jurisdiction took particular notice. One of these detectives reached out to the investigators on Eddie's case with a disturbing piece of information. A year prior, a 42-year-old man named Stephen Simmons had raised red flags for getting uncomfortably close to a 14-year-old boy named Sam Manzi. Now, the detective wasn't calling about the rapist himself, but about his victim, because Sam Manzi lived just a stone's throw from where Eddie's body was discovered. Stephen Simmons, it turned out, was a known quantity in law enforcement circles. A seasoned child abuser from Sloan, Calanda, with a history of preying on vulnerable kids. He'd even had a brief, disturbing involvement with a 14-year-old girl. The guy had been arrested twice for assault, once in Brooklyn, then again in Florida. His introduction to Sam Manzi, that last victim, a year before Eddie's murder. Following a round of medical evaluations, the family received a phone call from the clinic informing them that Sam could return home. According to the results, there were no signs of psychological or neurological abnormalities. However, this news did not bring comfort to his parents. On the contrary, they were alarmed. They expressed strong concerns about their son's mental state and firmly believed he required more than just a clinical green light. They believed he needed real, structured help. Despite their efforts to have him reevaluated, their concerns were largely dismissed by the professionals involved. Feeling unheard, the very next day, the family took the extraordinary step of filing a legal request, hoping the court would mandate psychiatric hospitalization for their son. They described Sam's emotional outbursts as deeply unsettling, signs of inner turmoil that seemed to be growing stronger. His parents were convinced that the trauma he had experienced at the hands of Stephen Simmons had left lasting psychological scars. His father, especially, feared that Sam could pose a danger, not only to himself but to those around him. The case became even more complex due to conflicting professional opinions. A hospital psychiatrist had concluded that Sam showed no signs of severe mental illness. However, the therapist who had worked closely with him during the abuse investigation felt otherwise. That therapist raised serious concerns, citing disturbing stories Sam had shared, tales that hinted at violent ideation and unresolved emotional trauma. In the end, the court ruled that Sam should be returned home. The judge believed that his well-being would best be served within the care of his family, and that he did not pose an imminent threat. It was further concluded that any residual psychological issues could be managed through standard outpatient counseling and support from experts. What no one could have predicted, however, was that Sam returned to his family just 3 days before Eddie Werner vanished. That timing, in hindsight, raised troubling questions. Detectives working Eddie's case took notice of this coincidence and decided to speak with Sam directly. When officers approached him, his demeanor immediately raised red flags. He appeared tense and evasive. He denied any knowledge of Eddie, insisting that they had never crossed paths. On paper, this seemed plausible. The two boys attended different schools and, by all accounts, had never met prior to Eddie's disappearance. Still, detectives pressed further. With permission from his mother, Sam was brought to the police station for questioning. Investigators also searched his room and examined his computer. What they discovered was alarming. a significant number of illicit photographs featuring minors were found on his device. Even more concerning was the forensic evidence. The medical examiner had noted a shoe print on the victim's back. Police found a pair of shoes in Sam's room that bore the exact same sole pattern. During the interview, Sam's mother sat beside him. When she was told about the nature of the accusations, she chose to speak with her son privately. It was during the conversation that Sam reportedly admitted to her that he was responsible for what had happened to Eddie. He spoke about long-held fantasies that he had finally acted upon. In his mind, he blamed his therapists for failing him. He saw them as the ones who had let him spiral. This, he claimed, had driven his desire for revenge. The mother relayed this shocking confession to authorities. Shortly afterward, Sam himself gave a full admission to detectives. The emotional toll led her to appear on a nationally televised interview where she shared the whole story publicly. That appearance sent shockwaves across the country and turned the case into a media spectacle. The coverage was relentless, and the story became the focus of intense public debate. In the wake of his confession, Sam Mency was formally charged with murder, aggravated assault, and robbery. The 15-year-old was taken into custody and held on $500,000 bail, awaiting trial. Normally, his parents were pretty vigilant, keeping a close eye on him, but on that day, they both had to be out for work. They thought they'd only be gone for a few hours. According to reports, Sam was hanging around the house when he spotted Eddie, an 11-year-old boy going door-to-door selling candy for a social support fund. Apparently, when Eddie knocked on Sam's door, Sam initially shooed him away, but confessed he felt a sinister urge to attack him. To try to fight these terrible thoughts, Sam even called a girl he knew from a psychiatric clinic. He chatted with her for a while, hoping it would distract him, but it didn't work. He couldn't shake the darkness, so he went outside, where Eddie was still selling his candy. Sam approached Eddie, telling him he'd changed his mind about buying candy and invited him inside, saying he didn't have any money on him. Trusting and naive, Eddie agreed. Sam lured him into the house and locked the door behind him. They went up to Sam's room, where, he admitted, he started to harass the younger boy. Sam stated that Eddie got scared, started crying, and begged to leave. Instead of letting him go, Sam cranked up the music and tried to calm him down. He claimed he only intended to assault him initially. But after committing the act, he panicked, realizing Eddie would tell his parents. Sam was afraid of facing the same consequences as someone named Steven, and he didn't want to go to jail. So, in a moment of horrific decision-making, he decided to silence Eddie forever. According to reports, he used a cord, wrapped it around Eddie's neck, and even braced his foot against Eddie's back, applying so much pressure that a bruise in the shape of his soul was left. He strangled the child for about 10 minutes until his hands ached. Then, he switched to a tie and continued strangling him. Sam claimed that even after all that, Eddie made a sound, as if trying to breathe. Terrified that Eddie might still be alive, he grabbed an alarm clock and started beating him over the head. Afterwards, Sam stole $200 from the boy. With his parents due to return soon, Sam had to figure out how to hide Eddie's body, but couldn't do it as fast as he wanted. Sam hid Eddie's body inside of a suitcase so the police wouldn't find Eddie. At 3 hours in the morning, the following night, Sam took the suitcase and headed to the forest while his parents were asleep. He chose a secluded place, knowing that the people living there had gone on a trip and couldn't see him. When he was far enough away, he dumped the body. He threw Eddie's clothes and the backpack into trash cans near his house. Sam's parents came home from work that day, and everything seemed normal. They later told authorities that Sam was acting completely calm, not giving away the horrific secret he was carrying. He just continued his life like nothing had happened. The big question was, should Sam be tried as a juvenile or as an adult? If he was tried as an adult, he could face life in prison without parole, something the victim's parents desperately wanted. As a juvenile, the maximum sentence was around 20 years, with a chance for parole after only about 7. It's a stark difference. What's crazy is that these types of attacks, a teenager preying on a younger child with an abuse motive, are incredibly rare. While the courts were deciding Sam's fate, Eddie was laid to rest. The funeral was packed, with over 600 people mourning the loss. And just a day later, the prosecutor announced Sam would be tried as an adult. During this time, he was held in juvenile detention, but under constant watch. Because there were concerns he might try to take his own life. It was thought he wouldn't survive in prison, especially since he hadn't eaten or drank anything since his arrest. His mental health was a huge concern. The prosecution was determined to try him as an adult, hoping it would deter others from committing similar crimes. However, Sam's lawyer immediately said that Sam himself was abuse-assaulted and did not receive the help he needed. His attacker, Stephen, who was already in prison, believed the authorities bore some responsibility. Sam's parents even sued the medical professionals, accusing them of negligence for not providing adequate treatment for their son. Amidst all the legal wrangling and media frenzy, Eddie's parents felt lost. The focus had shifted to Sam. They feared people might pity Sam and he'd get away with what he did. Eddie's relatives went on TV, making it clear that Sam wasn't the victim. They argued it was time to stop making excuses for criminals. But the media was all over the story, psychiatrists and commentators weighing in left and right. While all this was happening, Sam's mother found a horrifying photo hidden in one of his books. It was a picture Sam had taken after Eddie's murder, the boy lying dead with a cord around his neck. This seemed to confirm his guilt beyond any doubt. And, while in juvenile detention, Sam committed an assault himself. After the assault, Sam was immediately moved to an adult prison. At trial, his lawyer insisted he wouldn't plead guilty. But the judge rejected that, saying there was no reason to believe Sam was insane at the time of the crime. So, the trial went ahead. It was clear the defense would try to paint him as mentally disturbed, using that as their strategy. As the trial date neared, Sam was offered a plea deal, and he took it. Later on, the parents of both boys actually met and reconciled. They realized both their kids were victims in this whole tragic mess. Now, the prosecution wanted Sam locked up for good, painting him as a total sociopath with a thing for hurting kids. In the end, Sam got sentenced to 70 years, but with a chance for parole after 59. Sam and his abuser, a guy named Stephen, actually wrote letters to each other in prison. They talked about everything: politics, philosophy, the news. Stephen still blames the cops for everything, saying that if he hadn't been locked up, Sam wouldn't have snapped when he saw Eddie. Sam's parents, though, see Stephen as pure evil, the guy who twisted their son and made him capable of such violence. They think that if Sam had never met Stephen, none of this would have ever happened. The Elliott family are humble, hardworking people who live a quiet and contented life. Carl Elliott had married Lisa some years before tragedy would cross their path. Their marriage resulted in 2 children: Felicia, their first daughter, and Gregory, a son born just a year later. Carl worked relentlessly, balancing jobs as both a mechanic and carpenter, determined to give his family the best life possible. They lived in a modest house, set on a beautiful plot of land in the small rural town of Dalton, Arkansas. Behind their main house stood a mobile home, where Lisa's aging parents lived under her care. Both suffered from declining mental and physical health, possibly dementia, and were hard of hearing. Having them close wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was an act of love and duty. Carl and Lisa believed families should take care of their own, especially in their most vulnerable years. The town's remoteness and low police presence made it a hub for drug activity. But for the Elliott family, those shadows never came close until the night of July 30th, 1998. That night, a fierce storm swept through the area, dumping relentless rain and turning the streets into streams of mud and water. At around 1:15 a.m., Deputy Randy Barber, the lone officer on patrol, responded to a call regarding a domestic disturbance at the Elliott residence on Township Road. As he pulled up, he could hear raised voices from within. But by the time he reached the porch, silence had fallen. With no lights in the house, Barber decided to leave without further investigation. When the storm eased the next morning, Lisa's stepmother, Mrs. DuBois, woke and tried to open her front door. To her confusion, it wouldn't open, Something heavy seemed to be obstructing it. After a few failed attempts, she went around the house, trying the other entrance. What she encountered there would scar her for the rest of her life. On the porch, just outside the mobile home, lay the lifeless body of her stepdaughter, 27-year-old Lisa Elliott. Overcome with terror, Du Bois rushed to inform her husband, Kenny. Soon after, Sheriff Rob Sammons arrived at the Elliott property. As he approached the main house and knocked, he noticed the front door was slightly ajar. He called out but got no response, only the faint sound of a television playing somewhere inside. As Sheriff Rob Sammons stepped through the Elliott's doorway, he couldn't help but feel a pang of horror. There, in the middle of the living room, lay the lifeless body of 6-year-old Gregory Elliott. Sammons moved quickly through the house, hoping to find a survivor. But in every room he saw blood smeared across the kitchen floor, splattered along the dining room walls, and even smeared across a child's toy telephone. It was a display of resistance, fought back with everything they had. Outside, Lisa Elliott's body remained where her stepmother had discovered her earlier that morning, collapsed on the porch. Investigators soon noticed something chilling: a bloody handprint smeared across the door of the mobile home belonging to Lisa's father. It suggested that, in her final moments, she may have tried to flee or call for help. But she never got the chance. And there was more. 2 members of the family were still unaccounted for: 30-year-old Carl Elliott and his 7-year-old daughter, Felicia. In such cases, investigators are often quick to consider the prime suspect as someone who goes missing after such violence. However, that theory would be shattered just 2 days later. Carl Elliott's body was discovered in the waters of the nearby 11 Point River. His execution was evident: 2 gunshots to the back of the head from a .22 caliber weapon. Knife wounds, shallow but deliberate, lined his throat. It appeared he had been silenced. Subsequent autopsy reports indicated that Lisa had endured a staggering 27 blows to the head, likely from a tire iron later recovered at the scene. But it was not the blunt trauma that killed her. In a final, unspeakable act of violence, the killer had forced the iron down her throat, severing her windpipe and cutting into her carotid artery. Her son, Gregory, had suffered an equally barbaric fate. The same weapon had pierced his throat multiple times. His skull had been fractured by a heavy blow, his jaw broken, and his tiny body covered in knife wounds. The disappearance of a 7-year-old girl cast a shadow over the entire town. Despite their best efforts, weeks passed, then months, then years. Each lead led to a dead end. The longer she was missing, the more likely it was that she was dead. Then, on September 7, 2000, over 2 years after the massacre, a chance discovery changed everything. A hunter, wandering deep through the woods near Warm Springs, stumbled upon something he hadn't expected: scattered remains lying in a dry creek bed. Leaves, soil, and time had nearly hidden what was left behind. The hunter alerted authorities immediately. Forensic teams arrived, combing through the site, collecting every fragment they could. Days later, DNA analysis confirmed what many had feared: those remains belonged to Felicia Elliott. The little girl had finally been found. The condition of the remains was too degraded to determine an exact cause of death. As the investigation continued, several names surfaced, but one family kept returning to the spotlight: the Greens. Billy Green, the family patriarch, was a well-known figure in the regional drug trade. His son, Chad Green, was not just involved, he was an active partner. What raised immediate suspicions was Chad's connection to Carl Elliott. The 2 men had once been close, bound together by a shared history of drug deals and late-night business. From the outside, they had seemed to maintain a cordial relationship. But after a while, that relationship fell apart. Some claimed that Carl Elliott had stolen several marijuana plants from the Green family, a move that had allegedly enraged them. Others spoke in hushed tones of Lisa Elliott, who, just 2 months before the murders, had reportedly reached out to someone in desperation, seeking a loan of $10,000. She had confided that they were in debt to the Greens and that she was terrified of what might happen if they didn't pay up. Given the Green family's long-standing reputation for violence and criminal activity, these rumors weren't easily dismissed. law enforcement kept a close eye on them for years. Despite multiple interrogations over time, the investigators were left frustrated. There was suspicion, motive, but never enough solid evidence to warrant an arrest. Then, nearly 5 years after the Elliott family's brutal demise, a twist of fate finally broke the case open. On July 29, 2003, a single tip changed everything. The informant turned out to be someone very close to the suspects, Mary Green, the ex-wife of Billy Green. Mary revealed what her son, Chad Green, had confessed to her, and even more disturbingly, what Billy himself had admitted years earlier. Mary explained that on the night of July 29, 1998, Billy had received a phone call from Chad. Without saying a word, he left their house and disappeared for hours. It wasn't until 2 years later that Billy finally admitted to her what had happened that night. He told her that Chad had been involved in something terrible and had called for help after committing multiple murders. Billy said he had gone out to assist with the cleanup. According to Mary's account, Billy placed the blame squarely on his son, claiming Chad was the one who had killed all 4 members of the Elliott family: Carl, Lisa, Gregory, and Felicia. Chad, however, would later tell a very different story, accusing his father of being the real mastermind and executioner. The very next day, law enforcement moved in. Chad Green, then 27, and his father Billy, 47, were taken into custody. While holding them, detectives began to press both men, leveraging Mary's statements to increase the pressure. Billy remained composed, cold, and unshaken. But Chad began to break. Eventually, Chad caved under the weight of interrogation. He agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. As part of the plea deal, his charges would be lowered to secure a 40-year prison term for his involvement in the Elliott family murders. Hoping for leniency, Chad accepted and began to tell investigators what had happened that night, his voice revealing the dark chain of events that had long remained buried. He explained that Carl Elliott had been entangled in illegal activity with both Billy and himself. He admitted Carl had stolen from Billy. And together, father and son planned revenge. According to Chad, the plan was set into motion on the evening of July 30, 1998. The Elliott family had been settling in for the night when a knock came at the door. It was Chad. He claimed his truck had broken down about a mile down the road and asked Carl for help. Carl, not suspecting anything, agreed without hesitation. He and Chad got into it, and Chad got into Carl's car and drove to the location. When they arrived, Billy was already waiting. Without warning, Billy drew a .22 caliber firearm and shot Carl twice in the back of the head, executing him on the spot. Chad said his father then rolled Carl's lifeless body into the nearby river. The act was swift, cold, and calculated. But the horror wasn't over. With Carl dead, Billy insisted they return to the Elliott home to tie up what he called loose ends. Upon arriving, young Gregory Elliott saw the vehicle and opened the door, likely expecting his father. Chad claimed he stayed outside, near the car, while Billy entered the house. Minutes later, shouting erupted from inside. Alarmed, Chad stepped in to see what was happening. What he walked into was chaos. He found Billy in the middle of a violent assault on Lisa Elliott. When Billy noticed Chad watching, he ordered him to leave, saying it didn't concern him. As Chad turned to go, he said he glanced back, and what he saw would haunt him forever. Lying on the floor was Gregory Elliott, already lifeless. After the violent assault on Lisa Elliott, Billy Green turned his attention to the last surviving member of the family, 7-year-old Felicia. The terrified child had been hiding in her bedroom, frozen with fear. According to Chad's confession, his father wrapped the girl in a blanket, cradled her in his arms, and carried her outside. Chad later recalled seeing slight movement from the blanket. Felicia was still alive. Without a shred of compassion, Billy placed Felicia into the trunk of the car. Her mouth and hands were bound with tape, preventing her from screaming or escaping. As they prepared to leave the Elliott property, something outside the window caught Billy's attention. Across the lawn, Lisa Elliott, somehow still clinging to life, was crawling through the grass, fighting to survive. Billy didn't hesitate. He exited the vehicle and approached her with cold resolve. Then, in a final act of cruelty, he ended her life before calmly returning to the car. Despite the horror they had just committed, neither man spoke of regret. But the violence didn't end that night. Chad later confessed that Felicia had not been killed immediately. Instead, she was held captive for 2 more days. He claimed she had been locked inside a garbage can in the blistering heat of their garage, where temperatures soared above 100 degrees. What the child endured during those days was unspeakable. Chad recalled one especially disturbing moment when Billy, showing no remorse, reportedly muttered, "All good things must come to an end." It was then, on August 1, 1998, that Felicia's short life came to a devastating end. Billy allegedly drove her to a remote creek, just half a mile from their home. There, he forced her head underwater, holding her down as she struggled. When her body finally went still, he took it a step further, slashing her throat to ensure there was no chance of survival. With that, the massacre of the Elliott family was complete. The legal process that followed would be long and complicated. In 2004, both Billy and Chad Green were convicted of the murders. Billy received the death penalty for his role in the killings. Chad, who had cooperated with the authorities and provided crucial information, was granted a plea deal and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Yet, the revelations didn't end with the former inmate's chilling testimony. When the retrial resumed, the courtroom was surprised by Billy Green himself taking the stand and testifying against his son, Chad. In a moment that stunned everyone in attendance, Billy recounted a conversation that had taken place just days after the Elliott family was murdered. The two were driving back to their home in Warm Springs after a routine trip to a convenience store when Billy confronted Chad about the killings. Billy asked Chad directly if he killed his family. Chad, with tears in his eyes, allegedly confessed. According to Billy's account, Chad explained that his truck had broken down on the night of the murders. After walking to Carl Elliott's house to ask for help, an argument had erupted. Things escalated quickly. During the confrontation, Chad pulled out a gun and shoved it in Carl's face. The gun discharged, killing Carl instantly. In a panic, Chad then rolled Carl's body into the nearby river and returned to the Elliott home. Billy testified that Chad admitted to killing Lisa and Gregory Elliott shortly after returning to the house. Then, without hesitation, he took Felicia, wrapping the frightened girl in a rug and placing her in the trunk of the car. But the horror continued even after they left the scene. Billy claimed Chad later carried the child through a wooded area into a flooded creek, the aftermath of a recent storm. Billy explained that he hadn't shared this confession back in 1998 because he feared his son would be sentenced to death. With no eyewitnesses and inconclusive DNA evidence, the prosecution had been forced to build a case on confessions and circumstantial links. Eventually, the law delivered its verdict. Chad Green was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences, one for each life he took Carl, Lisa, Gregory, and Felicia Elliott. He also received an additional 40-year sentence for kidnapping Felicia. In a separate case, Chad was convicted of abusing 2 young girls, for which he received another 56 years. The court made a very disturbing discovery: Chad Green had long been known in his community as a predator. It was widely believed that Felicia had confided in her father about what had happened, and that Carl had planned to go to the sheriff. That knowledge, investigators theorized, was the catalyst for the massacre. Chad had decided to silence everyone who might expose him. Billy Green also faced the consequences of his involvement. He was handed 4 life sentences for the same murders, along with a 40-year sentence for Felicia's abduction. Although prosecutors had once pursued the death penalty, the lack of direct physical evidence made it unattainable. Instead, both father and son would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Today, Billy and Chad Green remain incarcerated at the Arkansas Department of Corrections. They are serving their sentences with no possibility of parole. The Elliott family, whose lives were so cruelly stolen, were laid to rest together at Gravesville Cemetery in Dalton, Arkansas.